I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
And could you please let the record show that all 7 commissioners are here today? Let's see, go right into the city manager's report, please.
Thank you, Mayor. Good morning, everyone. The fiscal year 2020 street paving bids were open last week. The apparent low bidder is Adel Construction at $428,992. This is within the budgeted amount of $450,000, and work is anticipated to begin this November. Beach Nourishment Project is moving forward. Great Lakes Dredge and Dock anticipates mobilization of their equipment in mid-October. The construction staging area will be the Deauville Beach parking lot. They will work north to south, starting in Rehoboth Beach, then going to Dewey Beach. They will work 24 hours a day, 7 days a week to complete their contracted work. The timeline for work in Rehoboth is 20 days, and in Dewey it's 25 days. The North Shore's meter replacement bid opening is tomorrow, October 8th. The contract is anticipated to start the beginning of November. The scope of work includes replacing approximately 300 meters with 1-inch or smaller meters. The affected properties will be notified. Delaware Avenue stormwater improvements, there will be a pre-construction conference scheduled for October 16th. The pipe rehabilitation project is scheduled on Delaware Avenue from First Street to the boardwalk, and the boardwalk from Wilmington Avenue to Brooklyn Avenue. The contractor, who is SAK Construction, anticipates work beginning in mid-October and continuing through the end of November. And the affected property owners and business owners adjacent will be notified. The outfall pipe inspection, the team plans to remobilize this week if weather cooperates. They haven't been doing too much because of the weather and the conditions of the ocean. Phase 2 wastewater treatment plant electrical upgrade. This is a joint project with Sussex County. The pre-bid meeting and the site visit, they were held last week, and the bid opening is scheduled for November 7th. Some upcoming events here at City Hall. We will host an afternoon of art on Thursday, October 17th, here at City Hall at 1 p.m. The public is invited to the event, which features the Coastal Camera Club, Rehoboth Art League, Bill Wolf's tree sculpture in the atrium on the first floor, and a mural that's been painted by Brett Steves. The coastal theme mural ribbon cutting is planned for 1:30 that day, October 17th, and both Mr. Wolf and Mr. Steves will be at the event to celebrate the afternoon of art. Today at noontime, we welcome back the Blood Bank of Delmarva. There'll be a blood drive from noon to 6 in the Convention Center. Information to sign up is on the city's website, or anyone can drop in to donate. They're currently, they have a need for O positive and O negative red blood cells, platelets, and plasma of all blood types. On Wednesday, October 23rd at 1 p.m., the City of Rehoboth Beach and the Mayor's Advisory Committee on Trees will offer a crash course on the art of pruning. Participants will have a hands-on opportunity to prune plants around City Hall and in nearby parks. There's also a presentation regarding restoring nature's relationships from award-winning author and ecologist Doug Tallamy. He'll give a free public lecture at the city here on Monday, October 21st. Lecture will begin at 10 a.m. as part of the Mayor's Advisory Committee on Trees meeting. Mr. Tallamy is a professor in the Department of Entomology and Wildlife Ecology at the University of Delaware. He's authored 95 research publications and has taught insect-related courses for 30 years. The lecture will be held here on the second floor in the Commissioner's Room. And lastly, City Hall will be closed on Monday, next Monday, October 14th, in observance of Columbus Day. There will be no residential trash pickup. Citywide trash pickup will resume on Tuesday, October 15th. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Anything from Solicitor?
The only thing I want to mention, I've been working with Ann on some FOIA requests, and I thought it was interesting, the commissioners might find it interesting as well, that this year, we've realized a sharp increase in FOIA requests. I asked her for some of the numbers, and we are at 204 records requests for 219, with 3 months still to go. And so by comparison, in 2018, we had 179 total requests, so we've already got 35 more this year with 3 months left to go. And in 2017, there were 144 FOIA requests. So just worth noting, because Ann's world of FOIA has ramped up pretty dramatically over the past couple of years, and especially in 2019. So she should be acknowledged for the good work she's doing in that area.
Thank you, Ann, for all that work you are doing.
That's all I have.
That's all you have? All right. I think we're going to have to pass on A for right now, because I don't think John Basio is here to discuss the merge and draft wayfinding design and necessary steps to move forward. So we'll just move into old business B and just postpone it until John arrives. And B is continued review and discussion of the draft administrative variance ordinance. Glenn?
Thank you, Mayor. So there are only a couple changes to this. There was one area in the ordinance where I referred to the building official a few times, and it's more properly referred to as building inspector. So those have been changed in the ordinance. Let me look back at my notes real quick to be sure there wasn't anything else. There was a question about the whereas clause. One of the whereas clauses, the third one down, references Title 22 and talks about the allowance for a municipality to implement this sort of administrative variance. And part of it says, it vests a designated town official or department with authority to administratively grant a dimensional variance for existing conditions that do not exceed 1 foot of the required dimension. So it references existing conditions. I looked into that, and the existing conditions really deal with a variety of different things, including the existing topography, the existing lot size. So I didn't find anything that would prohibit the building inspector from issuing an administrative variance for new construction, and it happens in most of the jurisdictions that allow for an administrative variance. This language saying existing conditions doesn't seem to restrict the building official to projects that are already in the area. For example, a legal non-conforming structure, that's an area where he could grant a variance, but under the research I did, it could also be for new construction. Other than that,
Did you put in the reporting, the requirement to report on a monthly basis? I didn't see it in
It is
here, but I
not in
could
the
have just
ordinance.
missed
No,
it.
I
I know
remember-
it's,
I
I
remember
know
us
it's
talking about
operational,
that.
but I think it's important to do that, particularly in the first year.
do you think it needs to be
determine-
codified in the code, or is that something that Dom can put in his monthly report just by by policy directive of the?
I'm open to,
Because I think it's worth. I do think it's good data to have.
It
It's not
is.
sure that it's something that needs to be. I'll do it.
codified. It wouldn't normally be in there. Then I'm fine unless anybody else feels strongly about it. I'm fine. I'm fine with Dom just making a commitment
Dom,
to
extent
improve
this-
it.
To the extent the ordinance is passed, I mean, Commissioner Schlosser and others have identified something they'd like to have in your report is just an update monthly on how many administrative variances were issued, should this be passed. Okay.
Yeah, I'm fine with his agreement verbally. That's fine.
The other question that was raised that I did not incorporate, because I found myself wondering exactly how to incorporate it. There was a question about whether the fee, I think it's a $50 fee, should be charged if the administrative variance is to correct a survey error. But then I got thinking that if it's a survey error, we shouldn't be issuing a variance to fix the survey. We should get a new survey that actually is consistent with existing conditions. So was there something that I missed on that issue? Because I couldn't figure out how to incorporate it in a way that made sense to me. I mean, I agree that we shouldn't be charging fees for somebody else's error, but on the other hand, we probably shouldn't be issuing the administrative variances when the survey doesn't reflect actual conditions. We should probably get a survey that reflects the actual conditions.
Yeah, I agree
So
with
that didn't make it into the ordinance. So as I said, the only thing that changed is I changed the word official in, let me see what line it will be in your package. Yeah, the word official in line 67 has been changed to inspector. Instead of building official, it says building inspector, because that's what Dom is referred to, or his position is referred to under the code. And the same thing in line 75. But those are the only changes that were made.
Now, going back to what you had in the whereas a variance for existing conditions that do not exceed 1 foot. I understand from our conversations that or our discussions, that it was primarily, this was for previous construction. Are we now saying that it would be the same for brand-new construction?
It would be, unless you want to put it specifically in the ordinance and limit it to existing construction. I mean, I think there are two things that are worth having a discussion about. One is that, whether it's applies to new construction. You know, for example, if there was an odd-shaped lot and somebody wanted to go into the setback by 6 inches to square off their home based upon their lot, I think, you know, is that an instance where you think it would be appropriate for the building official to grant an administrative variance, or is that an instance that you would like to go to the Board of Adjustment? So that's the one area for new construction. The second area I think is worth discussing is under the current draft of the ordinance, it would allow an administrative variance for up to 1 foot, which is the maximum allowed under the state code. Is 1 foot appropriate, or should it be something less than that? I think you talked about that a little bit at your last meeting, and we left it at 1 foot. But just those are the two issues that I see as something you might want to have some discussion about.
Yeah, I think, you know, from the discussion that we had before, the focus was on previous construction. You know, somebody saying something about, you know, what they had already in there, and to be able to have a building permit if something was already within the 5 or 6 inches.
We talked about the weird case where I remember an instance where somebody needed just to re-side their building,
Yes.
which was going to cause a 3/4 inch increase into the setback, and that had to go to the Board of Adjustment, and yeah, so that kind of instance.
Yeah, because my big fear is we allow 1 foot, say, and I think 1 foot is fair. Over 1 foot isn't. But we've got 6 and 10 now. I mean, does this allow somebody to come in and just say, okay, I'm only going to have 5 on one side because I want a bigger driveway on the other side of 11?
It would, and the only backstop you have there is that the ordinance references the standards that are applicable to a Board of Adjustment hearing for the building official to make a decision on these administrative variances. So in fact, I did include that in the new ordinance, I'm sorry. So at line 77, it says the decision of the building inspector shall be governed by the exceptional practical difficulty standard applicable to the Board of Adjustment for area variance determinations. So the Board of Adjustment has to apply the exceptional practical difficulty standard, which there's been a lot of case law on it as to what that phrase means. Dom, and hopefully any future building official, you know, they're well involved with Board of Adjustment decisions. So they have some understanding of that legal standard, and hopefully in consultation with me, they'd apply it. So this shouldn't be something that is just rubber stamped. If somebody comes in and asks for
Okay.
a 5-foot setback, it shouldn't be rubber stamped. But again, if you want to restrict it to existing construction and see how that works, and then maybe ease it into new construction if you think at some later date, that'd be another option. But there is a legal standard that the building inspector is supposed to apply before granting these.
Well, I like that side better because, you know, I'd like it to be that in consultation with you, that they're not just making the decision, okay, fine, on new construction. And it's focused on existing construction, but if something comes up that the building inspector speaks with you about it, it's.
Yeah, for new construction, I would expect these to be far and few between.
Yeah.
I suppose people will ask for them early on if the ordinance is adopted, but I think, you know, between Dom and I working together and Matt, I would certainly be very reluctant to grant an administrative variance on new construction because typically you can work within the confines of the lots. The lots in Rehoboth are pretty well squared off except for some instances.
Okay.
I'm okay with the way this is worded right now. I think there's a check and balance in there for new construction, so it's not getting out of, out of sync with what our intent is. I'm good with that personally, and I'm good with a foot. I mean, this is a foot. On a 5,000 square foot lot, that's 1 foot, right? I mean, come on, 5,000 square foot, that's a foot. So I don't know, I think you keep it with a foot, and then that's why I think the reporting back to us is so important, so we can assess. We should be doing that, in my opinion, with every new ordinance, but assess whether it's meeting the intent of what we wanted it to meet. So I think with the reporting, I'm comfortable with the way it's worded now and with the 1 foot. It's so de minimis. I mean, that's 5,000 square feet, so.
I mean, and my feeling as well on that is maybe up to a foot, but I would prefer that people don't come to Dom and say, hey, I hear I can have up to a foot of extra siding.
Right.
It's more of.
Not a freebie.
It's not a freebie. It's, okay, if they come to Dom with an extra 3/4 of an inch or 2 inches of siding, can I do this? Rather than, oh, I know I can do up to a foot, so what's the big deal? And
there has to
why
be a
don't I add
reason.
something else on there?
Yeah, there has to be a reason and a justification. I think one of the things we were going to do is update the form, the request form, and I think that's exactly kind of one of the things. There has to be a reason for the administrative variance, not just I want another square foot.
Well, the last sentence in the third whereas clause says subject to the standards, procedures, and conditions set forth in the ordinance granting such authority. That's based on what the Board of Adjustment has to deal with. So I think that's the real check, and he has to go by that. I mean, that's the law as we've put it in place.
Good point.
So if you want to move forward with it, there would be, I'd need to be directed to prepare a public hearing resolution that you'd have at your regular meeting, and then a public hearing next month, and you'd be able to vote after that.
I'd like to back up a step or two here. I have a couple of issues as I've studied this, a couple of main issues, and I think they probably all have fixes, and I think there's real value in having this for the reasons that have been stated about siding particularly or HVAC equipment. But as a way of educating myself about what was involved here, I actually went back to research the discussions that had taken place before, and I have to admit I'm a little perplexed about the process that was followed, because I have a number of, I know it was discussed by the Law Oversight Committee, and in fact they came up with a whole list of suggestions. I then spoke with one of the Board of Adjustment members who's here, and I would actually like to ask her opinion about this. Apparently there was a meeting held a few months ago where the consensus seemed to be that this was going to be dropped because there were so many issues. So neither of those things happened. The provisions that the Law Oversight Committee, which is specifically charged with the details of looking at ordinances, was brought into the final, nor was the input from a meeting, and I'm just wondering where we are in the process, and if the Board of Adjustment has weighed in on all of their concerns, and if we have heard those concerns.
We got comments since I've been leading this. This has been going on for a year, over a
Right,
year.
but the first
number
ordinance
one.
was only last
Okay,
month.
I'll speak just real quick. It's been going on for a year. We got feedback from various parts of the community, to include the Board of Adjustments. I'm not saying we accepted all the comments from the Board of Adjustments or from the Law and Oversight, like any ordinance. We took those into consideration, as well as other input, formal and informal, and built this in. There was no discussion about dropping this at all. This is something we felt pretty strongly, I think, a consensus of us moving forward with, and it's been discussed publicly for, I think, over a year. I don't have the dates in front of me. So, and it's been vetted. We talked to the county. We've gone through several drafts with input. No, we didn't accept all the input. Of course, you can't accept every single bit of input, but we listened, and the intent reflects the conversations and the feedback that we did get from the Board of Adjustments. Thank you.
I would like to get the Board of Adjustment to weigh in on that. Let me, before we do that, let me just mention my two main issues with it, because some of the others are just wordsmithing. But one issue, and I met with Dom last week about this too, and as I said, I think this is very useful to have it. I can think of many instances where it would really benefit people. But I'd like to avoid giving people false hope and the need to be realistic on this, because it creates, in many respects, more code ambiguities. I mean, Dom's not able to approve it if it triggers other parts of the code, such as FAR, such as lot coverage, such as additional parking required. And so, you know, somebody comes expecting to get it and then they don't get it because it triggers these other parts of the code. So that's, and there's the fix there would be to specify exactly what could be granted. And we can get into this later. He and I talked about what he would be comfortable granting if we made it specific. But the other main issue I have with it is, I spoke with the county as well, and it is not comparable to the Sussex County ordinance in several critical respects. And that is that the smallest lot in the county is 50% larger than our standard lots at 7,500 square feet, and their residential lots go up much higher than that, 100%, 200% larger than ours. Their side and front setbacks are greater, 40 feet and 10 feet, not our 6. So, for instance, it's a foot for them is 2.5% on the front versus our 10 to 17%. It's a big difference. And also, I asked them if they had any other code provisions like ours that would be triggered and how they dealt with that. And they said, well, the only code provision they have on lot coverage relates to mobile homes, and this ordinance doesn't apply there specifically for that reason. So the only lots they have that are the size of ours, they don't allow this variance to be given. That's their check and balance. And the other examples that actually the Law Oversight Committee had in the beginning were all counties and not municipalities. And so and it stands to reason that this kind of thing is typically done in areas where, at least an entire foot, without really narrowing it down to specifically what you're willing to give, is typically done in areas with larger lot sizes. So those are and I think there are fixes. I mean, I have a number of other notes about individual things that could be done for a fix, but those are the things that concerned me. And now I'd like to hear what the Board of Adjustment
Well, I'd like to
has
respond, though.
Okay.
So the purpose of this administrative ordinance was to give relief to people with a siding issue.
Absolutely.
To give people basically, again, I repeat what I said earlier, the third whereas clause, the official has to use the procedures and the standards that the Board of Adjustment uses and in granting this. So I believe that for someone, a resident, to have to pay $1,000.
Oh, I totally agree. I totally agree. We need it. I totally agree. And I think if you limited it to what Dom and I talked about was limiting it to mechanical equipment, exterior maintenance such as siding, clear title, survey errors, although Glenn's just made a point about how that might not be the right fix here, or even the temporary installation of a handicap ramp, something our code doesn't even allow now that would be very useful for people. I think if you limit it to that even if, Dom, correct me if I'm wrong, that even if doing that had a slight trigger for the other code, that you were prepared to, that would be okay because it would be limited to those elements.
Again, I don't know what the fear is here because I don't see Dom granting something if it doesn't pass the test of the Board of Adjustments procedures. So,
Well, that's the point. He can't. And people would, but the way it's written, people will come with the expectation. I'm trying to not create false expectations on the part of the public. I'm also trying not to create more code ambiguities. You know, I think we need to be as clear as possible about what it can be used for, and because it's very useful.
And as I said before, the expectations aren't that, okay, well, you can have up to a foot you can change.
Right.
That's up to Dom. It's, they come in with a project and they say, oh, I've got to add on to an inch. Well, Dom's going to look at it and says, okay, it's within the 12 inches, so that's an inch. Now, does that affect the FAR or whatever? If all of a sudden these things trigger, he's not going to say it. He's going to pass it to the Board of Adjustment. This is just, as Commissioner Cluzzi was saying, is trying to make it a little simpler for the building inspector to make minor decisions
But that's
above
actu-
and beyond.
That's my point, is that if even a siding issue comes in and triggers another part of the code, he's not going to be able to do it. The whole thing is circular.
And he passes it on to the Board of
But that
Adjustment.
means it can't be used at all. Whereas if you put provisions in there where it can be used, then it can be used and not have to go to the
He's the
full board.
final decision maker.
But you
He-
just said he
whether-
wouldn't be able to
Whether he
approve it.
says yes, or he passes it on to the Board of Adjustment.
But in that instance, he wouldn't be able to approve it if it triggered other parts of the code unless we
Yeah,
specify that there are certain
and
ones
I don't
we
think
can
there's
live with.
anything that we pass out to the public saying, hey, have expectations that you can have this. And if you can't, then make a big stink about it. It's more of, this is what I'd like to do. Can I do it? And Dom's going to say yes or no. He's going to say yes because it's within that 12 inches or 1 inch, whatever it is, or no because it triggers something else. So they're going to pass it on to the Board of
And
Adjustment.
somebody comes with a siding case and he passes it on because it triggers lot coverage or FAR, and they're like, what? You know, I mean,
Because it triggers FAR.
a siding?
If that's what he says.
So I guess there are a couple distinctions I see here. So what Dom and Commissioner Gay seem to talk about are instances where we all could say it absolutely makes sense. And if that's the administrative variance, I think, is supposed to address those circumstances that aren't always foreseeable. And that's why the legal standard is exceptional practical difficulty. You have to come and say, why this isn't the ordinary situation, it's an exceptional practical difficulty. So I guess what I'd suggest is if there's certain areas, and we've talked about HVAC for years, and siding, if there are certain areas that we all can agree, or you all can agree as the legislators, that those instances make sense, then maybe code provisions specifically addressing those handful of issues are appropriate to codify HVAC, to codify siding, so that we don't worry about other areas of the code being triggered. The administrative variance, I think, is a little bit different in that it's supposed to be set up for those situations you don't anticipate.
Right.
And then the board,
Right.
then the building official says, is this an exceptional practical difficulty or not?
What about solar panels raising the height of your house or something? Actually, we're not, that's not part of
That's
these
exterior
setbacks,
maintenance.
but, so anyway.
I mean, the other thing I would say there, and again, there's some other picky little points, but the other thing is, a lot of the meat of this is in the whereas clauses, and the text of the ordinance itself is quite brief. So I think there are a lot of things in there about existing conditions or about the authority of the building inspector and about it says the decision will be governed by exceptional practical difficulty, but all of the standards of the Board of Adjustment should be used here. And I think, though, that needs to get into the text of the ordinance itself, because the whereas clauses aren't part of the ordinance. They're just the background.
It's all part of the ordinance.
But I really would like, would it be appropriate for us to hear from the Vice Chair of the Board of Adjustment on this?
Is there anything else from the commissioners?
No, I'm ready to move forward with this, but, I mean,
Sure,
I've already heard from the Board of Adjustment, but I guess we can hear it again.
probably be better over there.
Yeah,
I
and
think
there's
that
going to be a,
one's on, right?
yeah, just to be clear, there's going to be a public hearing as well.
Yeah,
I mean,
no, no,
where
no question.
everybody can weigh in on where we are.
Linda Kaufman, 206 Laurel Street. But I'm here today. I am Vice Chair of the Board of Adjustment. I am not speaking for the entire Board of Adjustment because we've not taken this up, but I'm speaking as a member of the Board of Adjustment. Couple issues, and Lisa, with all due respect, I was at that meeting, and we all walked away with the understanding that this was probably not a good idea, and that we would figure out a way to do 1 or 2 inches. So that maybe you and I were at different meetings, but I just want to be clear that I was as surprised as anybody else to see that this was back on the agenda after we had that meeting and vetted these things out.
I don't even know what meeting you're talking about.
It was,
Why don't you just make it?
thanks.
Yeah, go ahead.
So there's a couple things I think that needs to be thought out here. And I agree totally. As a member of the Board of Adjustment, we get in some tough cases. I mean, I think everybody's seen the last couple months have been some real tough ones, and the code has some real challenges to it. So my first request is that you do lock this down to make it very clear. Because when we sit up there as a Board of Adjustment member, we're sitting there trying to decipher a very complicated code that has a lot of contradictions in it and a lot of issues. So to Susan's point, I think some of the whereases could get incorporated into that, and I would recommend that. I'm glad to see that, you know, it does talk about what we know in our business now in Board of Adjustment as a quick check claim. And that's the 5 or 6 criteria that have to be met for granting a variance. Keep in mind, as you're doing this, a variance is a legal implication. It goes on forever. It's not just a one-person thing. So when you grant a variance, you're granting the right for that property to have it in perpetuity. So we look at variances as as the last case scenario. Having said that, wow. I think when we had the discussion at that meeting, we were talking about the things like siding, 1 or 2 inches, things like that. And I think a foot does give people sort of this false sense. So yes, I understand that quick check has to be followed. Yes, I understand all those things. But you're putting a lot of responsibility on someone to decide. And Lisa, to your point, a foot isn't a lot, but let's say I come in and I make a good argument for a foot on either side, all 4 sides of my building. I mean, now you're talking about, you could have hundreds of square feet of difference. So I think a foot, maybe, unless you nail down the specific reasons. I think HVAC doesn't fall into that 1 or 2 or 3 inches issue. And so I think HVAC is one of those things that does need to be looked at for being able to be in setback for up to a foot. And in some cases, they may even be more than a foot. So, those kinds of things. But I think as you go through this, the request I have from a Board of Adjustment is that you nail it down and get it very clear, because we're dealing with more and more complexities. I invite any one of you to come to a Board of Adjustment meeting. The requests are getting more and more complicated. They're getting more and more intricate. They're asking for more and more because of, frankly, the land value and what's happening. And so everybody's trying to push the limits. And so when we deal with ambiguities in the code, it makes it really kind of a challenge. The second part of this that I think needs to be addressed, and this maybe is more for Glenn, but I'm curious about the process that would be followed. I mean, is the applicant allowed to come in and bring an attorney and make a case similar to what they do in front of us? In which case, are you really having a hearing? In which, are you going to record it? I mean, there's a lot of those kinds of questions that I think you as commissioners need to have answers before you pass this. Currently, when someone comes before the board, and I used to be on that mindset of, I can't believe someone has to pay $1,000, and then you realize that it's a court case, and there's a court stenographer, and there's a chance to appeal it to a court of law. It is a legal proceeding. And so with something that's going on now in an office with 1 or 2 people, I think you really have to think through that process of, how's that going to happen? Am I allowed to come in with my attorney and make my full case? In which case, what you're really then doing is giving that sort of hearing process to a 2-person group, or maybe 3 people if Matt's there too. And I think there's some risk involved in that. So I think there's more to be flushed out here. I'm in agreement that when you're talking about those 2 or 3 inch cases, the siding issues, things like that those become very difficult. And it is hard to convince someone to pay $1,000 for 1 inch or 2 on their siding, and I think those are the things you have to look at. But when you start talking about a foot and you don't specifically have a process with this, I think you do have to be careful that you don't open the door up, and although Dom or any other building inspector would have to do the quick check, there's still a lot of leeway in that.
All right, thank you.
So I do have a comment. Dom makes decisions every day on all kinds of plans, whether it be residential or commercial. That's what we entrust him to do. And he lives by the code. Consequently, that's why a lot of these cases end up going to the Board of Adjustment. He knows what he's doing, and I feel like if we try to put in this code every possibility, or it's only HVAC, or it's only this, I think, potential for us to be going back and trying to deal with yet something else, or for an owner, whether it be a person who owns a residence or a business owner, having to go to the Board of Adjustment and pay $1,000 for something that, and it's not just the money, it's the time too. These people, the way it is here, and most everybody knows how long it takes to get a house built here, and things get stopped up and then not blaming them, but it takes a long time for things to get through anyway. And this is to ease some of the issues that people have had. And I trust Don implicitly to do his job, and I think he does a great job. So I feel that it's important that we let him do his job, and that this is just going to ease things for him and ease things for people in the city who want to build, and keep a logjam from happening in his world. So that's just my opinion.
Anybody else?
I agree. I just 3 points that, and then I have a comment. One, this is really all about us looking at our community and the workload of our staff and trying to streamline the way we do things while being in compliance with the codes that we've set up. And there's so much ambiguity with the code that we do need some flexibility. If we say that we have to define this to the nth degree, I think you're saying that you don't trust the city manager and the building inspector. You don't trust their judgment. I trust their judgment, and I think he makes good decisions every single day, and I'd like him to have a little more flexibility in making those decisions. Number two, I think it's really important that, I think, Pat, you made this comment, or the mayor did, that, the reason we're doing this is to address things that we don't anticipate or can't anticipate in the code. So to try to narrow what's in the code to address things we don't know are going to come up in the code, that's kind of not the purpose of this. So I would like to propose that we ask Glenn to set up bring an ordinance to us at the next meeting to set up a public hearing.
I have one question for the city solicitor. Do we risk having some legal precedent set on the decision by the building inspector? For example, an inch is given here or there for that reason. Someone comes for an inch or two for a different reason, and it's not granted. Are we setting ourselves up for some?
So any decision that the city
Risk.
ever makes can always be challenged. That's the starting point. But so the law says that property is sui generis, which is Latin meaning that every parcel is different. So typically in the context of Board of Adjustment variances, and this would be akin to that, it doesn't have precedential value. People will always look to it and say, well, you did it over there, but legally it doesn't have precedential value.
What's the term? What's that term, just
Sui
for
generis.
learning?
Sui generis.
Try to
Okay,
spell it.
I'll ask you next
I'll
time.
email it to you.
Latin.
Okay.
I'll email it to you.
All right, so you can take a look at that, to draft up an ordinance, and, take a look at that, and obviously from this conversation that we've had today, if you find any other places that need to have additions prior to that public hearing.
Okay.
Is this the meeting where we should be going over the fine points? Because I have about 10 more that are minor, because again, I'm all in favor of having this. I think there's a use for it. I just think that, all zoning code is specific to the area, and we have a very specific set of circumstances here, and so there's some fine tuning that I'd like to ask about. We're going to move forward with it. One thing is, in addition to moving the whereas, some of the whereas information up, it talks about notifying adjacent property owners, and Glenn, you and I spoke about this after the last meeting. Adjacent doesn't mean what you think it means. It's not just the abutting properties. Those would be either abutting or adjoining. Adjacent, from a legal definition, includes properties across the street. In other words, they're properties that would be adjacent but for the road between them. Adjacent is used in our code 64 times, and yet it is not defined in our code at all. Instead, what is defined is a specific numerical measurement for notification purposes. So both for consistency and, again, to not introduce further ambiguities into our already deficient code, and also because denials would go before the Board of Adjustment, I think their procedure and language should be followed in this as well. And for that, 200 feet notice is what's standard in our code. We use it for, the Board of Adjustment uses it, we use it for many other things. So I think rather than adjacent, it should say that property owners within 200 feet of the property.
Yeah, I disagree on that. 200 feet, if someone's adding an inch to the side of their house, I think everything I see from the Board of Adjustment that I've seen in cases is, I look at it from the perspective of how it really affects the people next door. If they're building a second story, how does it affect the people next door? Not so much 200 feet away, because I don't think we have anything in the code saying, hey, that takes away my view. So I disagree with that. I think it's
But if it gets-
adjacent, because it's in there 64 times, why not 65?
Did we not have this discussion previously, and there was consensus that we were interpreted in as next door?
Yeah.
But adjacent is not defined in our code, so somebody could be adjacent across the street, have a problem with it, and raise an issue after the fact.
Well,
It's
then
not
let's change it
defined.
to abutting.
Change it to, yeah, okay, or adjoining, or what, it's not defined, that's not defined either, but, I mean, and if it gets denied, it goes before the Board of Adjustment, and then they have to notify. Even, so if Dom denies it because it affects lot coverage, the 2 inches affects lot coverage, and he doesn't approve it, and it goes before the Board of Adjustment, then they're gonna have to notify people within 200 feet.
That's the rules of the Board of Adjustment.
I mean, the fact of the matter is the term adjacent says having a common vertex and a common side. I mean, it's pretty clear what adjacent means. I don't know why we have to redefine it
Not
above
in-
and
not-
beyond Webster. That's just my take on it.
That's Webster,
so.
but from a legal and real estate point of view, adjacent does not, Glenn, am I right? Includes
So
property.
adjacent typically means if it's separated by a street. For example, we see it a lot when a municipality wants to annex property. The property has to be adjacent to the corporate boundaries to annex it. A street that separates the corporate limits from the property that you want to annex is considered to be still an adjacent property. So as written, notice would go to adjoining property owners, and property owners across the street would be presumed to be.
Oh, you would assume that in
I would-
here?
I
Oh,
would.
okay,
I
all
would,
right.
yeah.
Well, that's,
Well,
yeah.
I kind of feel then we should definitely change it to abutting, because I don't want my neighbor across the street having to decide whether or not I put different shingles on my house because they don't like the color.
I'm okay with abetting.
Abutting.
Abutting,
Is that the best word,
what Pat said.
Glenn?
Adjoining, abutting.
Adjoining is good. Adjoining.
Adjoining,
Means the
fine.
same thing,
let's
so
go to
it
adjoining.
means next to or common boundary with,
Yeah.
so.
So I have the addition of being next to or having a common boundary with abutting, but adjacent or not,
It's just not
whatever.
defined. Again, you know.
adjoining,
Adjoining
okay.
is good.
It's a matter of setting up expectations. It's, you know, tell you upfront what we mean, and.
And you had some other things?
Oh, yes. First of all, my understanding was that this was only supposed to be for residential. I don't know if it says that in, but that was always, that was a discussion I heard at previous meetings, and that it was not to be used in commercial zones, but I don't know that it says that anywhere.
Does not.
And I don't think we ever said it's
Oh.
residential only. I mean, I
Oh.
don't recall, I don't
I-
recall saying that.
I thought I heard that in a previous meeting, that this was only going to be for residential lots, because with commercial zones, it's different in the sense that for those abutting residential, there's a 5-foot setback requirement. So you're going to allow a commercial structure abutting a residential neighborhood to go less than 5 feet. That's the least setback we have, because in residential, it's 6 on one side, but when commercial abuts a residential zone, it's already 5 feet. We can go less than that?
I don't recall ever talking about this being residential only.
I say
Anybody
keep
else?
it the way it is and let the public weigh in, and we can modify that, because I've heard both sides of it. So I'd say for the public hearing, keep it in there the way it is, and if there's a lot of good discussion about why it should be only residential versus commercial. I know the conversation went back and forth, to be perfectly honest, is what I recall.
You have more?
The exceptional practical difficulty standard is here, but there are, I guess, 3 or 4 standards that the Board of Adjustment uses. The quick check is that I think probably should be specified in here as the criteria. All of them should be specified in here as the criteria.
So just on that point, we could probably do that. Quick check has been around for a long time, and it's pretty well-defined law.
Yeah.
It could
something-
change. It could change, and if you specify the factors and they change, then our code would be inconsistent with the factors. But
Right.
they haven't changed dramatically over the past 20 years. So, you know, that, I mean, I have them up actually. So under quick check, you're supposed to ask, is the requested dimensional change minimal? Is the harm to the applicant with denial, is whether the harm to the applicant with denial is greater than the probable effect on neighboring properties if granted. The difficulty must be practical, not theoretical. Difficulty must be exceptional and not routine. So we could incorporate them as standards into the ordinance. That's at your pleasure. I mean,
But
exceptional.
aren't they technically in there? Isn't that
it
what
is
the
the
Board of
exceptional-
Adjustment is using
Yeah.
every time they look at a case?
That's right. It is the exceptional practical difficulty
Yeah,
standard.
I don't know that there's a need to put that in there unless somebody sees a need to.
Just,
What else?
again, trying to make it complete. The one thing, I mentioned that I've seen these variances in, you know, obviously a lot of the examples used were counties with bigger lots. I did find one municipal administrative variance, actually in a town in Georgia, that limited the setback, the maximum that you could give. In other words, it had the administrative variance in their code, but it said, at no point shall any of the setbacks be less than 5 feet. So I don't know whether we want to consider having a limit so that, because theoretically, and you've said that this is for eventual cases that we can't even imagine what they are. So therefore, you have to imagine it at its most. You have to imagine this being used to the extent that is allowed in the code. And that is that somebody could come along and get a foot, neighbor could come along and get a foot, next owner could come along and get a foot, and pretty soon houses are pretty close together. So in that sense, you know, you could have a set limit that will never be less than X feet to at least put some guide in there for how far this could be taken.
I don't see.
And again, that came from a municipal ordinance. I don't know what the standards are. I mean, I frankly think this is something that ought to be written by a professional code writer along with the redoing of our code, but I understand the need to get something in there in the short term. So just trying to make it reasonable.
I don't see any traction for that either. So, I mean, you can go on to the next one.
Difficult crowd, okay. The only other things were, I think building is mentioned in here, and perhaps that should be structures, because wouldn't this be allowed for a variance on an accessory building as well?
Yes.
So then you'd say structure instead of buildings, so that it would cover all the structures? And then it would also be existing structures? Or not existing?
Glenn, is that the standard we use, structure, or do we use both structure and building?
I think that one, if I could take that up with the building inspector and have a conversation about what makes the most sense, because I do want to use the right
Yeah.
term, whether it's
Well,
structural
that's
or
a,
structural.
yeah, that's appropriate to do, so we have it for the hearing.
Because I do agree that as written, the intention is for it to apply to accessory structures.
Yeah,
and-
that's what I thought, right, and so structures just seems to be the code, and that's all.
All right, great. All right, with that, Glenn will work on that, and work with Dom on putting something together, the new resolution for setting a public hearing in November, but it would be at the October 18th meeting that we would vote on that. And obviously, we'd have some more discussion at the November workshop, and then the public hearing in November.
Will do.
Is that? all right
Public
with
hearing in October or November?
The public hearing would be in November, but we have to have 30 days to set it. And we can
Okay,
only set
got
it
Okay.
at the October meeting, we would set the public hearing.
Got it.
Anything else? All right. And I don't see John here yet. We can move on to C, which is discuss potential amendments to section 270-46.1.2 relating to wireless communications facilities and the approval of special exceptions thereunder. Next to you. And I know you sent something out to the commissioners this week to discuss this.
Oh, so Right, so there's nothing in your packet. So
Yeah.
this is the comprehensive ordinance that was adopted a month ago, 2 months ago?
Yes, month ago.
And when the staff was working through the ordinance to, sort of figure out exactly how to implement it as requests come in from the vendors for wireless facilities locations, they recognized that there's a certain subcategory of these facilities that are supposed to be sent to the Board of Commissioners for the grant of a special exception. That would be the approval mechanism. I didn't catch it, and special exceptions are by state law only permitted to be granted by the Board of Adjustment. So the question that we have for the commissioners is, do you want to leave it as a special exception, and rather than having it sent to the commissioners, have it sent to the Board of Adjustment, or would you like to make them a conditional use approval, which the Board of Commissioners can approve, rather than sending it to the Board of Adjustment? The two instances where there's a special exception under the new ordinance is first for non-tower wireless communications facilities that substantially change the support structure. So this would be not one of the small wireless facilities, but a newer, larger one that's going to go on an existing pole or structure in the city, but they're going to need to substantially change the pole, the look of the pole, to be able to accommodate the new wireless facility. It's in that instance, and then in the instance where it's a tower-based wireless communication facility and pole, so they're installing a new pole. So under the current ordinance, those would go to the commissioners as a special exception, but they can't come to you as a special exception under state law. They have to go to the Board of Adjustment. The issue that I really want to bring to you is, if it comes to you, it could only come to the commissioners as a conditional use approval. And the reason that I have some reluctance to say do that is because conditional uses are presumed to be granted, something that you're going to allow with certain conditions. So basically, if you make something a conditional use approval, you're saying to the world, we think that this communications facility will be fine, so we're going to grant it. We just want to take another look and make sure that maybe there's some special conditions we need to apply.
So the decision, if I understand what you're saying, the decision regarding light poles in terms of what they look like in the city would need to be decided by the commissioners, or the Board of Adjustment could do a thumbs up or a thumbs down.
Right, and if they went to the Board of Adjustment, they'd go under a special exception. Special exceptions don't have the same level of a presumption that it'll be granted, so the Board of Adjustment would have an easier avenue to deny than would.
But they can't put conditional uses on them.
They cannot do.
Well, then I think it has to come to the Board of Commissioners, because we don't want them to either A, approve it, and then it's something that maybe we don't like the look of and we have no control of it, or they deny it, and perhaps we could have given them conditions that we would have allowed them to do it. So to me, it seems like the Board of Commissioners is the right place for it to go.
I don't have a strong preference one way or the other. I think it goes either way, but again, you're exactly right. The Board of Adjustment would not be able to, if the legal.
Place conditions.
Right, if the standard is met, it's going to be granted in whatever, yeah.
And I recall that the commissioners wanted to be the sole body of approving or disapproving these. So that would make
Yeah.
sense to.
The only thing I wanted to highlight and make sure the commissioners are aware of is that it would be a very difficult application to deny. So you're going to have a lot of leeway in attaching conditions, but I will be advising you, the starting premise is this should be approved with whatever conditions you think are.
Well, at least we
appropriate.
could set conditions.
Right.
That's,
Right.
Yeah.
And I don't know, Sharon, do you agree? I don't think there's going to be a ton of these. These are we're going to substantially change the pole,
Right.
or we're putting in a new structure.
Haven't been any that I'm aware of, and
Right, most everything's the small
Yeah.
cell stuff right now, so. So then, if that's the case, there seems to be consensus, I'll revise I'll prepare an ordinance that would change those approvals from special exceptions to conditional uses, and they'll just come to you. It won't take much to change the ordinance, because instead of saying special exception, it'll say conditional use. Okay. Everybody all right with that?
Sounds good.
Okay.
Good catch, thanks.
So do we have to have a public hearing
Unfortunately,
again?
it's another zoning change subject to a public hearing.
So should we have a resolution to set a public hearing in November?
yep.
And have it in October?
Yes, I'll happily get that ready.
Can you do that, Ann? So two so far, public hearings, same date. So we'll vote on setting the public hearing on the October 18th and have it at the November regular meeting. Thank you. And you can take care of whatever language stuff. All right. First off, I've now been told that unfortunately John will not be here. There was a miscommunication as far as John Basio being here for Merge. And I'm going to ask Ann to put his discussion, which he passed on to us, on the October 18th meeting. Just for the commissioner's sake, you do have in your packet basically what he's proposing. You do have a lot of the numbers that he's proposing as well. I know we'll have to discuss that in a public forum, and that'll be at the October 18th meeting. But we would like to get this going as soon as possible. And rather than waiting for the November regular meeting, we may want to set up a voting meeting to move forward between the November workshop and the regular meeting, so.
Excuse me, Paul, why do we, I mean, and if you have good reasoning, I'm absolutely fine, but just in terms of the fact that we have the materials, it's on the agenda now, there is a time sensitivity. Is it possible just for the city manager to talk us through this and have the discussion? I'm not sure why do we need the consultant here when we have all the data? So just in terms of time, I'm okay if everybody thinks that we need the consultant here.
I mean, it's a pretty big expense. We're talking about
Okay.
above $200,000. And he's gotten, last time was a little, kind of foundation of what he's talking about. Now he's got better
Okay.
things and more details that I think, obviously, we can look at, but I think it probably warrants some public discussion, and then the numbers.
Oh, no,
but-
I definitely want public discussion. I'm just saying do we have to wait for the consultant to have it, or is that something we can have
I
now?
think that would probably be best unless everybody
Okay.
else otherwise, but because
Be voting
if
on it
everybody
anyway
thinks that.
until the
he's
voting
got all
meeting.
the
We had
information.
asked him for this,
Okay.
so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So-
Okay, that's fine, thank you.
So we'll have it on the agenda for discussion at the October regular meeting, and at that point in time, we'll figure out the direction forward.
That sounds fine. I think that gives us enough time.
All right, great, thank you. Now we're going to move right into new business, a presentation by Todd Fritchman, President of Envirotech Environmental Consulting, concerning the current status and treatment of Silver Lake and Lake Gerar. It's all yours, Todd.
Okay. Possibly get the monitor on?
I think Ann's doing that now, sorry.
Is there a way I can turn that on? Oh, there
No,
we go.
she's
There
doing
you
it.
go. She's just trying to bring it up.
Well, good morning, everyone. My name is Todd Fritchman, and I'm an aquatic biologist and state of Delaware certified sediment and erosion control specialist. And my job for the last, it's been about a little over a decade now, is to design and implement the comprehensive lake management program for Lake Gerar, and also certain environmental management unit areas owned by the city of Rehoboth on Silver Lake. So my goal today is to go through and provide an annual report on the status of Lake Gerar, holistically, Silver Lake, and those environmental management units associated with Silver Lake. I'm going to be skipping around a little bit. If you look on the screen there, you'll see objective number 1 is to go over the comprehensive maintenance and management plan in review for Lake Gerar, to identify all the management units and what's going on there. Objective number 2 will be the Lake Gerar riparian buffer review. And the riparian buffer includes the no-mow zone, the vegetated filter strip that is surrounding Lake Gerar, its heights, widths, the shrub zones that were incorporated and installed for habitat and native plant stands throughout that buffer. Also, the southwest prong accretion status. I'll be going over that and demonstrating exactly what has been done to that bog creation area where there has been accretion from a number of sources, and I'll review those sources as well. I wanted to review the mature deadfall into the lake system from the private properties on the north side of the southwest prong and the south side of the northwest prong. Objective 3 will be to look at the environmental management service areas associated with Stokely Park, Silver Lake, by the Turtle Walk Bridge there, we call it, commonly known. The Silver Lane Park Restoration Area, and the Lake Drive East / Penn Street Living Shoreline Stabilization Area. And then just wanted to quickly review the City of Rehoboth Beach Street and Conservation Landscape Plans on the boardwalk. So I'll be moving pretty quickly. I want to also highlight the Lake Gerar Atlantic White Cedar Bog, the Silver Lake enhancements, and address some concerns that we have, just to let everyone know some of the concerns that we have on managing and maintaining these areas, since they are dynamic and change daily with environmental conditions and seed dispersal and different things coming in and out of the system, what our concerns are, and then the uses of Lake Gerar specifically. So very quickly to review, educational outreach obviously is a major part of this comprehensive maintenance and management plan. So the educational outreach component, other than this annual report, is included into the package of maintenance and management, and that includes any interpretations needed lakeside for homeowners or any groups or concerned citizens, property owners, and so forth. So that has continued over time. Not as much is occurring in terms of educational outreach now as in the past, but it's available at any time and for any concern. Mosquito control in Lake Gerar is basically, there is no mosquito breeding in Lake Gerar. Lake Gerar is heavily stocked with Gambesia holobrookii, which is the eastern mosquito fish. The population in there is a natural sustained population. The Gambesia holobrookii, the eastern mosquito fish, thrives in massive populations in there, and that's the best biological control known to mankind. They are larvivorous and feed on mosquito larvae voraciously, so no problems with mosquitoes. The only problem is they also consume a lot of macroinvertebrate organisms, their larvae stages. So dragonfly larvae, mayfly larvae, damselfly larvae, those things take a little bit of a hit too. Although our bioassessments do determine that they are present in the system. Aeration, I'll be touching base on that very quickly. Obviously, Lake Gerar is aerated with an air diffuser system. It is a very inefficient system for aerating the water, providing dissolved oxygen and aerobic return because of the shallow nature of the basin. It's extremely shallow. So you need 6 to 8 foot of water column to establish laminar flow of dissolved oxygen from a diffuser. But it's the best that we have in terms of technology. And it does break the surface tension of water, liberating a lot of nitrogen gas and so forth out of the system. But also controls the cyanobacteria blooms, the little wee beasties that stain the water green in the summer conditions. It breaks up their diurnal cycle, so their populations break down and dissipate. So we've seen huge reductions in cyanobacteria over time with the installation of the air diffuser system, the boiling water effect that you see from the diffuser heads throughout the lake. I'm going to talk about the buffers specifically. Aquatic vegetation control with Lake Gerar. We did have a little spike in aquatic vegetation control this year. We did have some sago pondweed blooms and some water naiad blooms. The entire lake actually bloomed heavily this year. So we had to go in and treat the non-emergent, submerged, rooted aquatic vegetation that quickly filled in the lake, and subsequently that has all gone and broken down, and we're back to a normal benthic environment there. We have had multitudes of cyanobacteria blooms because of our our hot spell that we had. The water was up about 85, 90 degrees. Obviously, the lake serves as a stormwater management basin for a certain quadrat of the city, including the business district and residential areas where all of the nutrient from the impervious surface of the city goes into that lake. So aquatic vegetation control was on a little bit of a spike this year. Structural and functional efficiency reporting, if and when we find deficiencies in pond slopes, inlet pipes, anything associated with the system in terms of structure and function, the outfall itself that lets water out into the ocean, those are all monitored and reported. Some of those issues are going to be, I believe, corrected on the southwest prong behind the playground there. They're going to be corrected with the streetscape program, some of the pipe stuff going on there. Water quality management, fish and wildlife management, which mainly in a system like this is the control of geese, which was one of the major objectives of this project, to reduce the goose population there, which has worked very well. We did have about 6 birds born on the lake this year in the buffer, so we have to monitor that population to make sure it doesn't get too large, and we have an excessive problem with carrying capacity and too much nutrient loading into the water. So let's go right to this is a rather a hodgepodge of images showing the buffers and their dynamic nature, their seasonal fluctuations of growth and development. Essentially in the riparian buffer, the no-mow zones of the pond, this is probably the most important component of water quality management. The most important, but it's the least understood and the least well perceived. The riparian buffer consists of native plant stands, deep-rooted native beneficial vegetation that ground cover the soils around the perimeter of the basin. Without ground covering those soils, we have erosion, nutrient release, no filtering, no habitat, no nutrient uptake, those types of things. So this is a heavily managed unit. We have warm season growth and cool season growth and development that starts in late March and goes all the way through July. And then that material goes dormant. Then there is a major pruning, a bush hogging, if you will, in that timely position between cool season growth and warm season growth, which starts later in July. Then there is another pruning that occurs in dormancy. So that will be occurring once everything seeds out now. These goldenrods that you see, the seaside goldenrod in the image, the high tide bush and some of the other things, that all gets pruned down to a 10-inch level during the non-growing season, during dormancy. So last year we did a study on the buffers to determine their widths and heights, and in a reaction to some concerns regarding the buffers and their widths and so forth. And we went out and studied those, and we did indeed determine, again, we've reported this in the past, that the buffers are much wider now than the plan originally called for, 10-foot riparian buffer around the perimeter. Some of the buffers are up around 20 feet, 21 feet. The buffers on this southwest prong that you see on the screen now were reduced about 5 feet. So they were taken in. So those numbers now are reduced about 5 feet. The mowing, which is the turf managers, there was a line of trees installed along the buffer by the Department of Agriculture years ago on the plain, the floodplain. So that buffer was allowed to grow out to that tree line, which is a good thing environmentally, because that's all wetland status soils, saturated, soupy soil that mowing isn't necessarily a good thing there, because you're rilling and rutting the soils and creating a soupy mess where nutrients are then released into the water. So that was reduced by the mowing team. The rest of the buffers are still in the same condition, the same status. So this is just a hodgepodge of different images of the wildflowers that were installed. They are allowed to grow and develop. You see some are in bloom, some aren't. The rose mallow, the taller plant there, is not in bloom yet. So this is the existing buffer in front of the picnic table in the parking lot there on the north side. You can see some of those grasses have not been pruned. Big blue stem, switchgrass, and so forth. We're allowing them to come to seed, obviously, before we prune those. This is all part of best management practice for allowing this vegetation to grow and develop. here you can see before where the buffer was up to the tree line, and then you can see after where the mowing has gone inside of those trees now. So that buffer has been reduced to accommodate some of the concerns down on that floodplain. Again, just showing the height of the buffers, and the height, obviously, if you regulate the height any further, you eliminate seeding, you eliminate flowering, and you don't end up with the natural beauty, the positive energy output that the pollinators and wildlife and so forth, mainly insects and migratory birds, need in order to sustain their energy sources. Again, just different shots and images. You will see native shrub stands. You see the southern bayberry. There is a little bit of a white vine growing in the top. Subsequently, that has been removed. The shrub stands were part of the original grant and were installed intentionally to break up the landscape and provide native shrubs and so forth into the buffer for obvious environmental reasons and stabilization. See the water quality in this image, which is a most recent image, is exceptional. However, that water, 100% transparent water to the bottom, but it doesn't stay like that. It doesn't stay like that all the time. It depends on the environment. Again, showing some of the shrub stands like the Sweet Bay Magnolia that is adjoining the bridge there. Those all remain intact. Here you can see some of the rose mallow in bloom. And this is an early season image showing the wildflowers, which obviously bloom for about 2 weeks and then dissipate and don't look so good after that until the next round comes up. Okay, the second thing I wanted to talk about for Lake Gerar, obviously the air diffuser system. That is compressed air. That's the one on the left, not the fountain. The one on the left, we have 3 diffuser pumps, and we have, I think it's 15 total diffuser heads out into the lake, and that is to force compressed air into the water column so that we can break water surface tension, liberate some gases out of there, and disrupt the diurnal cycle of cyanobacteria and other benefits that the aeration provides. So you can see when you look around the lake, you'll see the diffuser heads. Managing these is, they're machines, electrically driven compressor units that are mounted outside with long weighted tubing and all kinds of products out there that we have to attend to. And during flood events, electrical storms and so forth, that can short these things out. And we do all the repairs and replacement if and when necessary.
Todd, excuse me, a quick question.
Yes, sir.
Are there solar-powered similar kinds of equipment?
There are solar-powered air diffuser systems. The problem is they're extremely inefficient. And most of the solar-powered systems run during the daytime only, when the lake is producing its own oxygen through photosynthesis. The best time to aerate a water column is, like, say, from 5 in the morning to about 2 in the afternoon when the DO is low. Sure. So, yeah, solar, they are very expensive and they don't have long runs. So, yeah, but there are, yes, indeed.
Thank you.
This is the southwest prong that is an area of concern, obviously, because of the accretion from the stormwater pipe that inlets there. And then, as you can see, all the overhanging loblolly trees and the needle leaves that fall into the lake after 2 shedding cycles a year. This is like a dead-end lagoon, say in South Bethany or Ocean City, where they have a lot of problems. Everything that gets forced into this prong from northeast winds floating on the surface or transported in, it gets trapped. Plus everything that comes out of the storm pipe gets trapped, silts, sediments, and soil and so forth. Gets trapped there, so accretion has occurred over time, and this bog has formed. So originally we allowed native wetland plants to colonize that. The particular plant that we allowed to colonize that was called water willow, a low-growing, viney type looking plant that was undesirable. People didn't like that, so we eradicated that plant and we installed duck potato and sedges and rushes in there, and now we have the current image of that. We had to spray kill everything in there first. So the image on the left is death and dying of plants. And then the image on the right is what it looks like now. This is just the study that we did on that accretion. I'm not going to go through this study now, but I wanted to show you some of the concerns, even though I'm not in that section right now. Obviously, in this city, we have a lot of growth and development, reconstruction, retrofitting, new home development, and so forth. And when new foundations are built or soil disturbance occurs, that soil doesn't stay on site all the time. This pile right here obviously is in the street. Not only is it in the street, it's next to and over. It's actually over top of a storm drain. That means if it rains, all that soil goes into the storm drain and into the lake. So that's how we get the accretion of the silts and sediments. It flows into the storm pipes and deposits into the lake, and then you get fill. Also, the material, the organic material from the mature loblolly trees, the big needle leaves that fall constantly, that material falls and it does not decompose. It settles to the bottom, so we get an accretion layer, especially in that southwest prong. So this study shows you on the right image what is on the bottom of the lake. It's layers of silt and sediment, then layers of pine shats in perfect order. It was really neat to see how that... And it's anoxic down there, no dissolved oxygen, so this material doesn't even decompose. Perfectly brown pine shats at 8 feet down. They're just layer right up. So here's what the southwest prong looks like as of now. Much improved, in my opinion, personal opinion, with the native beneficial plants holding all that material in place. Without the vegetation, you just have brown, ugly, dead, decaying organic matter. You can actually stand on this bog and it floats. It's a floating system. You could sink right through it. So someday that should be removed. The image on the left, you see what I'm talking about. All that biomass, see all those trees? 2 cycles per year, all that leaf material falls into Lake Gerar. So over the course of time, aquatic succession takes place, and that's what you end up with, the accretion. You can see how everything blows into that corner. Let's see here. Moving right along. This is the East Lake Drive East Penn Street coastline restoration. This project was completed in order to preserve and conserve the Penn Street, what we call Penn Street or Lake Drive East shoreline and coastline adjoining. That's a big word today, adjoining. I was paying attention. Adjoining the roadway. What had happened over time due to the fetch, if you look up here. The wind forces capillary wave action against the slope, and over time, the erosion occurred up underneath of the roadway. So the roadway was in jeopardy of subsiding and collapsing. So we worked with the city on devising a plan here. We worked with DENREC on acquiring a grant. This was a while back, 8 or 9 years ago, where we went in and we put a biolog complex along the shoreline where the erosive zone was. And then we went in and excavated soils out of the lake, creating a deeper channel there, which was a great thing environmentally for fish, finfish and other organisms. And then we filled and created a bench shelf. Okay, and then that bench shelf was stabilized with biologs on the outside to retain the sediment and soil there. And so that went along until completed. And then we planted the bench shelf with native beneficial emergent wetland plants so that we have complete ground cover and stabilization of these soils over time. This is the regulatory agency's best management practice for stabilizing shorelines now, living shorelines. This is what they like to permit and are attempting to only permit these types of technologies now. Stone can be used, but then you lose your intake of nutrients and your habitat and all the different things that plants provide. So over time, and through a lot of struggle and battle, I won't get into all the details of the struggle and battle, but Originally, people thought we were building a beach. So people were coming down and actually setting their towels and umbrellas and everything down there. It was quite comical. And then we had some situations where some of this vegetation was intentionally killed, and then we rectified that and replanted it. And now this is what we have today, which is basically it's almost a perfect freshwater marsh adjoining that area. That doesn't mean we don't have problems. I'll talk about the problems more when we get to concerns, but you can see we are starting to get some erosion, again, now in some of the areas because the biologs have decomposed and broken down, which is what they're supposed to do over time. The erosion area is very small, but it is something that I'll be working with the town manager on possible solutions for that area to protect the shoreline there. This is the Silver Lane project. On Silver Lane on the south west side of the bridge there's a little pier that goes out. It's town-owned, okay? And we had to shore the coastline up there. It was eroding heavily, so we put the biologs in and plantings, and we did a showy wildflower seed mix in there after eradicating all the Japanese honeysuckle, English ivy, Phragmites australis, greenbrier. This area was allowed to go over time in succession. It was unmaintained and unmanaged, so we created the wildflower buffer there, which is blooming excellently now. It was mowed down a few times after we did it, but Liz Lingo here in town, she did some homework with the owners and put a little interpretation fencing around it, and that really helped out, so that area is now in bloom. You can see that. So this is basically the project. We had to kill everything first, rotary till the area, put in the seed, and then this is what we have afterwards. A nice wildflower meadow, which has all kinds of benefit to the lake and a nice stable base at the base of that slope. The streetscape program, I did all the conservation landscape plan and design for all the street end stabilization areas in conjunction with Commissioner Stan Mills. This is a while back, and I just did an assessment on these before for this presentation, and they are doing exceptionally well. 100% ground cover. All the native beneficial plants are thriving. Big blue stem, switchgrass, all the things that should be in a coastal dune ecosystem are doing extremely well there. The Silver Lake Stokely Street Municipal Park Buffer Creation and Stabilization Area. This is near the Turtle Bridge. We had to shore up the coastline there with the biologs and plantings again. And we are now doing an integrated vegetation management plan, not only from the bridge north, but also now the entire park. We've added that on to go in and remove all the exotic, invasive, and native nuisance vegetation amongst the beneficial trees and get that opened up some and more user-friendly. So that's what it looked like before. That's what it looks like now. And you can see the buffer is now functional and stabilizing the embankment. We do have issues and troubles with geese, obviously. Erosion from geese. They feed voraciously here. This is where they are fed daily. So human erosion and animal erosion are working against us some, but we keep fighting. Lake Gerar, Atlantic White Cedar Bog. This is on the the northwest prong. And the Atlantic White Cedar, we installed these years ago because this was a flooded part of the basin. Wetland, soupy mix, surface water there. The Atlantic White Cedar is a rare and threatened species, native to Delaware, that we overharvested for the shipping industry and for furniture production, so we installed these. They are maturing and growing and developing very well. We have had some loss to root disease with a white grub worm that gets in there and eats on the roots, but also competition with each other. Now that they're getting big, only some of those some go and some die because they got to compete with each other. Plants compete, believe it or not, more heavily than we do through all kinds of ways. So that's what it looks like now. Very successful situation there. Just a couple other things, side notes here on Silver Lake. Obviously, the permitting process is no longer in the hands of the city exclusively. in order to do any living shorelines, any mechanical impacts or stabilization or dock or pier install, that has to be permitted through the wetland section of DENREC now. So we just did a living coastline for a private resident that has really worked out well. We did a low-profile sill with vents that allow water to come back behind the stone, and then wetland plantings and biologs behind it. So that project is doing extremely well, and incorporated into that is a rain garden from the home's discharge from their sump pumps that run pretty constantly, and then that rain garden is all in flower and bloom right now. It looks exceptional, and that captures and absorbs all the water that's pumped out of the system, so it's not direct discharge into the lake and causing erosion and all kinds of problems. So real quick, concerns on our end. Obviously, that accretion zone of the southwest prong of Lake Gerar is a concern that is going to be addressed by the city, I believe, in the streetscape program, and we're available at any time to assist in that, however necessary. Death and dying of plants. This is the Atlantic white cedar bog on Lake Gerar. Obviously, we got a dead cedar tree there. Subsequently, it's been cut out and removed. But we do have death and dying of vegetation that occurs around the pond, and we have to address that from time to time. The exotic invasives and native nuisance are constantly managed with what we call integrated vegetation management. Again, we can do, the buffer situation on how high and wide. We're going to stay the course until, anything changes there. The other concern is the privately owned side of the lake where tropism is where plants grow out to get sun, and underlying limbs grow out to get sun. So there has been the concern brought up that the lake is getting smaller. The lake isn't getting smaller, it's the trees are getting bigger over time. Especially the underlying limbs that you see growing out into the system. So they're covering about 25 feet of surface water that normally, say 15 years ago, would have been exposed, but because of the growth, you can't see it now. Plus all that biomass that drops in. We're not at liberty to go in and remove all those trees and cut all those secondary stems off because that's owned by someone. But anyway, that's a concern to think about with the lake. On the southwest prong, there are a number of trees that have succeeded and pioneered there over time. My concern is that those trees are also dropping massive amounts of biomass into the lake, leaf litter that sinks and accretes, but also they're taking away the view corridor, and they're on the slopes of the pond. Woody stem trees are not good on 3-to-1 slopes or 2-to-1 slopes because over time they can topple. So if they topple, that brings the slope, then you got to reconstruct, regrade, and rebuild the coastline. So it is my recommendation that sometime those trees come out. There's about 6 red maples that I feel are a threat there. Also, to help with the lakes, anything we can do to kind of regulate the amount of silt and sediment that ends up in our roadways and our conveyances, as you can see here. With one rain event, that's tons of soil that will be transported into the lake. So if you compound that over 50 years, 100 years, that's a lot of silt and sediment going into our lakes. As you can see, the murkiness of the water there, that's a cyanobacteria bloom. So those types of things are always controlled and monitored. Those are concerns, but that's what maintenance is all about. Some of the old historical willows, these non-native willows, weeping willows around the pond, obviously, are diseased. I think that one needs to go. It's just had its time. It's not doing so good. It's not any habitat there anymore. It's diseased heavily. So we have worked with the city, and Liz Lingo, the arborist, has a plan in her notebook to eventually get this out. Base will cut it and remove it. Those are the trees I'm talking about there. That would look a lot better if we just saw water instead of those maples there. Human psychology would be a little bit better. I think. This is what I was talking about, just small little erosion areas where the capillary wave action is starting to remove plants. We lost about 4 foot in this one little section. It's about a 30-foot section that we need to maybe consider shoring up before it gets back to the road base. Uses, Lake Gerar, uses just through my recreational time through here in town. The uses on the lake, I think, have gone through the roof. The fishery is superior. In fact, there is a fisherman that has a whole website where he reports on Lake Gerar and Silver Lake, and that goes, international. So there's a whole network of chat and everything. The fishing there, the bass fishing is amazing there. And you get artists that are around the lake doing paintings and different things all the time. I think the uses have really gone up, which is ultimately what the goal was, is environmental, yeah, but aesthetic is what everyone wanted. So, and I always like to throw that one in there to show what it looked like before we implemented the program, what it looks like now. Quite a contrast. No exposed soil, everything graded and conforming correctly, and a lot of that waterfowl gone. Basically, the rule of thumb for 2 geese per acre, not 200. Anyway, with that being said, and with the commissioner's blessing, I could answer questions.
Todd, we've received at least one correspondence from someone that lives on the lake and is concerned by the geese management program, and I think the person cites that rodents, snakes, and other animals have become a problem. Is there any? Can you, I guess, talk a little bit about the reasoning for population management of geese
Sure.
on the lake, and then is there any validity to there being an uptick in rodents and snakes and stuff?
Sure, I'll talk about all those things. I am an aquatic biologist. That's right up my alley. So, the Mid-Atlantic region is plagued with a resident goose population. For instance, the city of Salisbury just spent many thousands of dollars to remove geese from their city limits. So they hired the USDA and then several other agencies to come in and lethally take thousands and thousands of geese out of their community. Ocean Pines, surrounding subdivisions. The resident bird population, those that are here from March to now, the end of September, have been put on the invasive species list. They are now invasive. So the U.S. Division of Fish and Wildlife, the state of Delaware Department of Natural Resources, all regulatory agencies condone not only the removal, and I'm not promoting this, I'm just saying this as a consultant. They now condone and provide the opportunity to lethally take and remove these birds from the systems because ultimately over time they stimulate eutrophication of the waterway. Each bird produces 2 pounds of feces per day. That is a super fertilizer. It's loaded with nitrogen and phosphorus. Well, if that's going into the water column constantly and continually, whether it's land-based watershed movement in a mobile phase with water flow, or whether it's a direct deposit, that ends up with a sequestering of nitrogen and phosphorus in the silts and sediments of the water that over time are going to stimulate algae bloom, cyanobacteria bloom, low dissolved oxygen rates, and so on and so forth. The other thing that the geese have a huge home range. They move everywhere all the time. And they're voracious herbivores. They eat constantly. So they remove vegetation. They pull vegetation out of the bench of the pond. They cause erosion and so forth. They leave feces in the trails and walkways and so forth like that. So there are many, many reasons that the native resident bird, the invasive resident bird should be controlled. Not just from me, but from every regulatory agency that exists in the environmental science field, including our Department of Natural Resources Environmental Control. We are not controlling migratory ducks. We are not controlling herons and egrets and other migratory waterfowl. Just the Canada goose is our target. We have not put grids across the lake in years, and it's probably been 7 or 8 years. We have never had the need to once we got the buffers established. The buffers are a control method themselves because these geese don't like to walk through the buffers. It stimulates predatory instinct to them. The vegetation's higher than their shoulder, like the golf course. They like to walk in and out, wobble in and out. So we've also taken major strides in reducing the feeding. One of our problems was the community, individuals in the community were feeding constantly. Once you feed a wildlife, you've domesticated it, especially a bird. Bird brain, that energy source to them, they're imprinted, they don't forget, they will stay, they will always come back. What is born on the lake will always return. They're imprinted to reproduce. So those little 6 new ones we had this year, which we haven't had any in a long time. I think we had 2 last year, this year 6. We just got to keep an eye on. The other question, so the geese I think I got. The other one was rodents and snakes and so forth. We have created riparian buffers around the pond. That means habitat. So there is more cover for rodents and snakes. They would be in the city anyway. It's just now we have more habitat. And yes, snakes do feed voraciously on aquatic life, especially frogs and frog larvae. All of our snakes do. They'll actually, most of our snakes will go into water to chase down a frog, and that's what they come for mainly. Rodents come to, I assume we're talking about mice or something to that nature. I don't know what particular rodent you're talking about. The lake does have muskrats, which are of the order Rodentia. We monitor for muskrat damage. In fact, we had a bunch of muskrats on one storm. We had come out of the storm pipe out into the ocean. There was muskrats running around on the beach. They went through the storm pipe and ended up down there. I was getting pictures of them. What are these? But anyway, we monitor for any damage they might cause. But yeah, that's part of the function of an environmental management service is to coexist with other organisms or animals. So, yes. Hopefully I got that all answered for you.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Todd, I just want to thank you for this. Having the pictures is great. It looks like a great plan. I especially appreciate you bringing up this about the construction and the runoff, because I know about a year ago, some of the Save Our Lakes Board met with the city, and my understanding is, and I don't want to put Kevin on the spot, but my understanding is we are working on an ordinance about construction runoff, and I think that will be very important and very needed for protection of the lakes. And I guess the other thing, you mentioned the stormwater management. And I think for the west part of the lake, that's going to be critical to clean that up so that you prevent what goes in the first place, right?
Yeah, it took, I don't know how many years. I mean, I grew up on Maryland Avenue, and that prong wasn't there when I was, used to use the lake as a kid and everything, but it's there now. And we went in and studied what caused it, and we know what caused it. It's 2 things: silt and sediment deposition from stormwater runoff,
Right.
and from organic leaf litter falling into the lake and layering on the bottom once it subsides.
So, but if the stormwater drains were to be filtered better, cleaned up better, how much would that reduce it? In other words, how much is due to what's falling from above versus what's going in?
Well, I think if we got it mucked out and cleaned out down to a bottom contour of 4.5 feet, 3.5 feet, whatever would be decided, we probably wouldn't have to address that issue in our lifetimes.
Oh,
because it took 40, 50, 60, maybe 100 years for this to occur.
okay.
So I think we would be good if it gets mucked out is the term, the general basic term for that.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, on that subject, Todd, I know, I don't know if it was 2 or 3 years ago, the city manager had actually put in some numbers from a budgetary perspective to do work on that southwest prong, and then the commissioners decided to take it out for that point in time, but I'm sure it's only gotten worse. You had that picture in there of basically about 75 square feet of bog there. That's what you're talking about, the 4.5 feet going down and removing?
Yes, sir. I'm going to pull, yes, Mr. Mayor, I'm going to pull this back up. Part of what we did for that study was we put some these were tentative numbers from a couple years ago. Yeah, it would be to remove this bog here and also clean out in front of the storm pipe. And let's see. Let me find those numbers. This is a while back. Bear with me 1 second.
75. I don't know, I just was going by the,
Graphic.
Trying to find my numbers.
it was about,
he used was 6,000 cubic yards back 3 years ago.
I know it's in here.
yeah, that was the page I was looking at. It was
Todd.
the page.
Yes,
like,
ma'am.
By objective
That's that
6
page, yeah.
in the concerns.
Oh, that's under concerns. I'm sorry.
Yeah, number 6
how do
under
I
the
do-
concerns.
Yeah, that measurement there is strictly the target area that I had done the study for.
So it would be 75 to 80 square feet, but then 4 or 5 feet deep.
Right, which would
a
give
lot
you
of-
an acre footage.
Yeah,
Yeah,
a
that's
lot
a
of-
surface area. And I believe we did this for our 4.5 foot depth. So,
And that, I mean, is it deeper now than it was 3 years ago that you'd have to go, or about the same?
no, it has accreted some more because the inflows haven't subsided, and obviously the leaf litter drop hasn't subsided either. The bog is a little smaller now in appearance, because we got rid of that water willow that was draping out over. So it looks like it's a little smaller.
But it's still there.
Yeah.
And we're also doing some, on Lake Avenue, doing some stormwater stuff in the future, right?
Correct.
Could we
Oh, here it is. Yeah. Sorry about that.
possibly, I mean, I think this is something we have to put back on the budget for going forward.
Well, it's in the 5-year CIP, we can move it forward. Probably it would need a reevaluation for the numbers.
Yeah,
We can do that.
yes.
Yeah, because, you know, obviously, I think it probably should have been looked at and done 2 or 3 years ago, but, you know, we put it off, but that's okay, we can move forward.
Yeah, it's understandable. It's not an emergency.
Yeah.
It's an aesthetic thing.
And there was recently some construction done right to the northern part of that. And I think that construction's done, because I think there was some runoff on that construction, just soil or whatever.
Yeah, that prong took a hit during the build out of all the new homes and motel and Bad Hair Day, all that, you know, up that slope. Everything came down during all that active build out, and it just did a number on
And
film.
I would think, you know, if we could put in the budget too, as you go up towards east, you know, towards the bridge, these are the trees that you're talking about that probably need to come out. The ones
Yes,
that are
right in
sitting
that,
there.
yeah, right there's a little walkway that goes down.
Way that goes down. I
Yes.
know exactly where you're talking
So,
about.
so we could, if we could kind of combine all of that together in some kind of an estimate, that would probably be good, because those photographs that you showed, those trees are,
Just taking away the whole appearance. And not only that, but now they got structural implications, so. If it was just aesthetic, I probably wouldn't be saying anything, because environment, you know, that's a tough call. But here, it's structural. I think they need to come down. That's my opinion. I know there's a tree ordinance, but it's justified.
yeah, I mean, they're going to go soon anyway, so
If they topple, they bring the bank, and that'll make it worse.
a lot worse, I think.
Yeah. And just one last note, there may be more questions. Managing Lake Gerar is collaborative. We know what the best management practices are and what products can be used. We're licensed to do it, we're certified to do it. But these things on buffer heights and widths and shrub stands and so forth, that's collaborative. So if there are concerns and people want something different and the city decides that, we just need to know and we'll act on that. But right now, everything is, in terms of environmental management, it's at A grade. Everything's A+ right now.
And one of the photographs you showed before had the buffer along this southern side, I guess, that was 20 to 25 feet wide.
Yes.
And you said you've taken that back 5 feet already.
That was, well, actually, great point. We didn't do that. It's whoever cuts the grass, whoever the mower is, the mower team.
Okay, so that's no longer 20 to 24 feet, it's now 15 to 19 feet,
Yes,
something like
it
that.
has been reduced about a mower deck's width behind those trees that were installed.
And you think that's a problem with the ground, can't handle the mowers, or?
I don't think it's a problem. The only problem will be like if we have significant rain events, they're not gonna be able to mow down there for another cycle till it dries out.
Gotcha.
More is better because it's just a coastal plain, it's just a floodplain. But, you know, there's a feeling that some people had there that it was getting too wide and too big. So we discussed it, met, and Kevin and I talked about.
Is there a width of a buffer that makes more sense than less sense? I mean, I'm not saying let it grow all the way up
Yeah.
the side, but
That's a great point too, and it all has to do with microclimate. Microclimate means the existing condition right where you are, where the soil interfaces there. Some areas, the buffers have to be bigger, like where the cedar bog is, because that area is all flooded. Some areas, like next to the fishing pier, where the little parking lot is, next to the fishing pier, that slope is a 3-to-1 upland slope. So that buffer doesn't have to be very big. It's just a strip to hold the soil in place around the lake. But when we put this grant together, we standardized it to 10 feet, consistent as a standard. And then it made sense on the mower's ends to make it bigger in certain places
where it was softer.
where it's softer and more hydric conditions there. That's correct. More of a wetland status situation. And of course, the plants that are growing there are facultative wetland plants. They're adapted to be inundated or during drought. That's where they thrive, in that area.
Any other questions? Anybody? No? Todd, thank you very much.
Thanks for having me
Really
today.
appreciate the report.
Yes, thank you. I'll just leave this up here, and if anybody needs it, it's here. I'm going to take my thumb drive out, though. Is that okay? Well, that won't mess anything up if I pull it out.
It's all right.
Oh, that's good. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, we're going to move into new business B, which is the discussion of appointments. I sent out a list of the, basically the boards, commissions, committees to everybody. I sent out a brief summary, and I'll go over that summary to let you know exactly the changes. Just so we know, basically, as far as the committees are concerned, I contacted each of the chairs of the committees and asked for their input on membership of the committees, and so that's what we have in front of us. I know a couple of the committees will probably be adding one or two more members, but I'll leave that to the chairs, and at some point in the future, the chairs will bring that to me, and I'll bring that to the commissioners. Just to go over the list, I'm going to start with the Board of Adjustment. And again, just summarizing the changes to what we've had in the past. In the Board of Adjustment, Linda Kaufman I am suggesting to reappoint for a second 3-year term. She's been on for 3 years, and that would be the second. I'm also suggesting to appoint Walt Castle for a 3-year term. And Walt is a resident here of the city. On the Board of Elections, unfortunately, Al Morris, who had been chair, did resign. And so Steve Simmons will now step up to become the chair on the Board of Elections. And then Steve Curson, who had been made an alternate last year, will move into a position of a formal member of the Board of Elections. The Park and Shade Tree Commission, Priscilla Smith will be stepping down after many years of being chair on the Park and Shade Tree Commission. Eric Wargotz, a present member, will now become chair. And at this point in time, there's still one vacancy that I hope to fill in the near future, and I will bring that to the commissioners at that point in time. As far as the Planning Commission, the new chair will be determined obviously by the Planning Commission at a future meeting. The Planning Commission does put in their chair and vice chair, et cetera. As far as members of the Planning Commission, new members will be suggested for 3-year terms: Barry Covington, Rachel Macha, and Stephen Kaufman. And then to replace the remaining term of Commissioner Gay of 1 year, Mark Hunker. Now, on the committees, no big changes. There's going to be a new, a new chair of the Street and Transportation, David Mann, replacing Kathy Osterholm, who had resigned earlier this year. As far as a new committee, as you all know, we put in place, and it's still a work in progress, an Environmental Management Committee. I'm not exactly sure of what the title will be. Charlie Garlow, excuse me, will be the chair, with Commissioner Schlosser, Commissioner Byrne being ex officio members of that committee, and the rest of the committee will be determined. And again, we'll bring that to the commissioners at that point in time. Let's see. I think I covered that. The new personnel new chair of the Personnel Committee will be Commissioner Sheffer, and Commissioner Szymanski will be added as a member of the Personnel Committee. And the final will be the organizational liaisons. Commissioner Gay is recommended for the Chamber of Commerce liaison, and then Commissioner Szymanski as the Main Street liaison. Let's see. You know, as to the membership of each committee, as before, I have left that to the chairs, and they have provided the names and the members. A couple of the committees may be adding to their membership, as I mentioned before, in the near future due to loss of previous members and additional interest in participating in committees. We have gotten a number of new applications to a few of our committees, especially the Environmental Committee that I've turned over to Mr. Garlow and to be looking at. And I think those are the changes for the committees. Before I open it up, I don't think, I think if you look at the list, and Ann will update this list will give out the, on the Board of Adjustment, the Board of Elections, the Park and Shade Tree, and the Planning Commission. These committees or commissions, boards, all have various different terms, anywhere from 3 to 1 to 2 years, and that is enumerated there. And I think that is it. So I'll open it up to any questions or comments that anybody has on these nominations. And again, my expectation is if everybody's okay with it, we would have a vote on appointing these different people to these different committees, boards, and commissions at the October 18th meeting. Any questions or comments from anybody? Nothing to add? Anybody?
Perhaps this is a good time. I had asked to be put on the agenda criteria and guidelines for committees, and then when the agenda came out, and this was before that on the agenda, I asked for that to be moved up, and I know you didn't want to do it that way because you wanted to give this as an introduction. But the only way I can really comment on this is to bring up, you know, what I've learned. So just by way of background and for the audience, and this goes back actually several months, certainly goes back before I saw any list here. So let me just say at the outset that anything I'm about to say, and I did create a chart of how other communities, the guidelines they have for committees, because we don't really have any. We don't really have any criteria or rules. It's been evolving the last few years. So what happened was this summer, several people mentioned to me, first, that they were surprised that we had members on our committees who were not residents or property owners. I knew that because I had been to some of the committee meetings and seen them, but I hadn't really thought about it. And then, you know, another person actually told me that they had signed up to be on a committee and they did not get selected, and then somebody from outside the city was. So it caused me to look at, well, you know, I knew that our committees had expanded in the last few years. I knew that they had also taken on new roles of recommending policies and procedures, and really good work being done at the committee level to both involve more citizens as well as to bring better completed work to us. And I think all that's great. But as I looked around, what I saw was that With the exception of one, every other municipality does require that committee membership be based, be residents and property owners. But I learned a lot in this process, and what I learned is really kind of interesting, because I see a way now to open it up to even more people, I guess is what I'm saying.
Do you mind if I interrupt you? Sure. We do have that, I mean, it's kind of going out of order, and I'd rather stay with the agenda.
But they're related to the people on here.
No, I understand that, and you can bring that up at that point in time.
Okay, that's
I'm
fine.
just-
You want me to bring it back then?
Yeah,
Okay,
if
well, they
you'd
are
like.
related, though, to the appointments here.
That's great.
That's fine?
I
Okay.
appreciate that. Thank you. Any other questions on the list themselves?
Just, no, thank you.
Thank you. All right, we'll move on to C, which is the recommendation and discussion from the Chief Building Inspector regarding importance of adopting 2018 International Building Code updates. Don? I don't know if that's on. That you may have to switch that on.
I got it on.
Yep.
Okay. It's still good morning. So, we are, you probably received my printout memorandum to everyone of the importance of adopting the residential code. I just want to say we are, well, no, I wouldn't say well behind, but we are behind the adoption, modernizing or adopting the new versions of the building code for residential and commercial as well. And usually these codes are updated every 3 years, and it's up to the municipality to decide whether it's appropriate to adopt them. Some of them, some municipalities adopt them with modification, which we have in chapter 102. So, and then the other reason for adopting is that we are constantly reviewed by the Insurance Service Organization, which sets up premiums for insurance company, what is our latest version of the code, and whether we have X number of staff certified to perform such work in the categories of which we're adapting. So each code has different certification requirements that we have to meet under the International Code Council. But they in terms come back to us, this organization comes back and evaluates where our premium will be set in addition to other things. It's gone now as far as involving the community rating system for flood insurance, which we have Dennis working on that. And Matt has been very aggressive in getting many of the certifications that he will require to be met as part of the requirements. I just wanted to say that there are modifications that have been made. One of the things that has been growing is throughout the state is the push to adopt sprinklers. We have in the past made it optional for property owners to do it. It's in the code, so no one is considered non-conforming. It's just that it's been legislated as such, and whether we will continue to do that, because it is an important issue that you may want to discuss. Now, that being said, there are provisions in the code that basically say that in 1 and 2 family dwellings is exempt. When you get into townhouses, they're exempt as well, providing they're not more than 3-story high. In this case, our zoning code doesn't permit 3-story properties, in the sense you can't be more than 35 foot in height. So if you have any questions, please ask me at this point or any time that you wish to ask me regarding the adoption of the 2018 code.
Dom, is there anything in the adoption of the 2018 code that would change your interpretation of the code would change in a way that it would disallow something that currently is allowed within your interpretation of the code?
Well, I want to say it in this fashion. It will not change the interpretation because of the new code will only, it applies only to the building. It doesn't apply to anything else, zoning or anything. It's just building. So what will happen, Matt and I were just touching base before I came up, and what in the 2018 is that there are stronger provisions for windows, but it doesn't, because of high wind loads that are coming into the area for storms and so forth, but it doesn't, it has not gone as far as requiring strapping the roofs to the walls and the walls to the foundation. It hasn't gone that far. And two cycles back, that was a requirement, and the 2012 was waive and remove, and it has not been reinstituted in the 2018.
I would just, I'm
Oh,
sorry,
go-
go ahead.
So it doesn't create any nonconformities, right?
No, no, whatsoever.
Matt, you just earned your certification for some of this. Do you have anything to add?
I think the main thing to focus on and to speak to Ed a little bit is that we don't build to the zoning code, we build to the building code. The zoning code restricts the size of building that you can have. So in terms of adopting the 2008 code versus the 2012, we're really just speaking about minor provisions that come into play, and it goes more to the construction methods versus the allowable amounts.
Yeah, I think my question is more, are there definitions or defining terms within the building code that would change your interpretation of our zoning code, which relies on the building code?
I don't believe so, not in my opinion.
I mean, the way I look at this is you're basically saying, hey, we're going from the 2012 to the 2018. And so we're just going through chapter 102 of building construction in our code and substituting 2018 for 2012, or striking a line completely, or adding something small. But I mean, it's not all of a sudden it's a whole different building code. It's just updating what we have already. And a lot of that's already in there. It's just.
Correct. One example would be the allowable floor to ceiling height as far as stair runs. That was increased incrementally. So, I mean, it's just small changes in there, the way the building is actually built.
I guess one thing that Dom did point out, though, that could be considered a relatively significant change is that under the 2012 building code, which the city has adopted, I think that was the first one that required sprinkling in residential homes, so single-family homes. The commissioners at that time exempted or revised that requirement so that single-family homes are not required to be sprinkled. Under the 2018, I think you guys are recommending that sprinkling be required in single-family homes as the 2018 code requires.
It's
Something for us to think about.
basically is take it under consideration, because there is movement in the states. City of Newark it's a requirement. Other than that, there's no other municipality in the state that requires it, but you go to Maryland, Maryland is required throughout the state.
So it's in the 2012 code, and it would still be in the 2018 code. However, the commissioners at one point previously to now,
Right.
In the 2012 code said, no, we're going to exempt these people.
Right.
But you're basically saying to us, give it some consideration as we move forward.
Just give it, only because I'm a building official.
Yep, no, I understand 100%.
I'm sorry, are you proposing to do this right away? to start adopting these like from today forward in
Well,
your?
we could adopt them now. Basically, we're going into the year. We can make it effective as of January 1.
I mean, there'd still be an ordinance that you'd all have to adopt before.
That's my
it-
question.
Yes, yes, I have to prepare an ordinance that I'm working
Got it.
on, and it'll come before you.
Okay, all right, all right.
I,
And,
I just want to say, my experience with the building code is that we as building officials and the International Code Council have been striving to make building more affordable. But for one reason, they don't come out cheaper when you go to buy them.
One thing I'd just like you guys to consider and think about, and we've talked about this for a couple years, is when we do make these changes, to build in a communication strategy and plan so that builders and developers and residents, both, full-time, part-time, other stakeholders know that we are, the implications of the change. So maybe, we put out a press release or a note or make it, that we have a standard process, that there's maybe a place on the website that we list any, changes to the code, that we give some lead-in time. So we're not just, surprising somebody that maybe didn't come to the meeting or whatever. So I'd just like you to think about, what that communication process should be so that we get the word out most effectively.
Okay.
Thank you.
I just wanted to add, Mr. Lasser, that I agree with you. We'll get that information further out. But we also reached out to the community. We had a builder, we had an architect, and we had 4 members of city staff, Kevin Williams, Evan Millers, Matt, and myself. And we basically went by primarily it was the residential code, because the commercial code is it's basically laid out. But when you get into the residential code, we want to take into considerations those elements that will impact dramatically on homeowners. In the case, just to give you an example, if you're looking at one of the discussions we had was about the sprinkler systems. It's not so much that whether an individual wants to do it or not, as under the 2012, because we have had several properties where they are installing them, is that we have the capacity, but we don't have the water pressure. So I could send you a picture of someone that's installing a storage tank in their basement to just have their sprinkler of their house. Okay.
Thank you.
Have a
Tom.
good day.
So you'll draw something up, and
I'm currently working on it. Hopefully, we'll have something for you to look at the workshop meeting next month. I should be able to have it ready by then.
for the workshop meeting,
If
and
you want to
then,
go forward with it, then I should be able to. Yeah.
okay. Can you put this for further discussion in the workshop meeting? I think we had it on the draft of the agenda for October 18th, so you can take it off from there. And, the way I read it, just this information that we have, it's just, most of it is just substituting dates.
It
And then
is,
there's a
and-
couple
and-
of lines, but
John
you'll
and Matt have
you'll
done most of the
explain
work,
that.
but I really need to walk through the code and make sure that everything's being adopted in the right way. So I
Gotcha.
think they've done most of the work for me. I just need to get to it and check it.
Gotcha. All right, thank you. All right, now we're going to move right into new business D, please.
Yes, I just wanted to introduce this briefly. I know that there's been much discussion about pedestrian safety, specifically amongst the commissioners. Commissioner Schlosser had specifically requested this be on the agenda for this meeting. Streets and Transportation also have spent many hours talking about pedestrian safety, as well as the total of the mayor commissioners. So Chief Banks and Director of Public Works, Kevin Williams, and myself sat down about a week ago and talked briefly about what could be done, and Chief Banks elected to put together a brief PowerPoint just to highlight some of the areas that we think would be best to concentrate on in the coming months. So,
Thank you, Sharon. Good morning, Mr. Mayor, Commissioners, City Manager, and general public. The one thing I would add is when we met, we specifically started out with what can we do or look at Rehoboth Avenue. So yes, I know the agenda has about the citywide, but right now we wanted to focus on Rehoboth Avenue. So I thought the first thing we need to do is, when we're talking about crosswalks and pedestrian safety, is what is exactly the state law and what do we follow in Rehoboth Beach? State law, pedestrians right-of-way and crosswalks. A vehicle shall yield the right-of-way, slowing or stopping if need be, to yield to a pedestrian crossing the roadway within a crosswalk. The key word there, within a crosswalk. So it's not waiting at the corner, it's not waiting on the sidewalk, it's actually taking a step off to move into the crosswalk. Okay, so that kind of sums that up. So the next part I wanted to look at was some statistics. And what, on Rehoboth Avenue, what pedestrian accidents did we incur over the last 3 years I looked at? And there was a total of 4 with that. At one in 2017, 2018 there was 0, and in 2019, however, there were 3. So I thought, again, let's take a look at that. What were the main causes? In 2017, the only pedestrian accident, a person was jaywalking, and they ran out in front of a vehicle that was making a U-turn. So it wasn't really a failure to cross up or say a person ran out and a person was making a U-turn and ran right out in front of them and got struck. 2018, as I said, there was 0 involved pedestrians. In 2019, so there were 3 so far. But when you look into it, again, it wasn't a crosswalk failure. The first one was in a parking space, and it was a parking dispute where a person said, I'm not moving, I'm holding the parking space for somebody, and that car decided, you're moving, I'm bigger, and kind of nudged them out of the way. Then the second one was that person was walking behind a parked vehicle, and the vehicle started to back out and did not see him and backed into him. Again, not a failure of a crosswalk. And the third one, a person was walking behind a parked vehicle, and a car went to make a lane change and ran over the person's foot, and all that caused that injury. Unfortunately, the driver of the vehicle was intoxicated at the time, so that caused that. I did just throw up bicycle accident, and it's just not that it had anything to do with crosswalks per se, but I just wanted to make sure of that, and we had 5 over the last 3 years. And quite honestly, 4 out of the 5 were just bicyclists were sideswiped by vehicles going down the avenue, and one was just a fair remain stopped at a stop sign. So again, not necessarily a crosswalk issue, but I did want to do that in since we're talking about safety on Rehoboth Avenue. Some of the problem areas or things that we could talk about when we're looking at that was crosswalks, signage and lighting, visibility. Let's get into this. Crosswalks. The one thing we spoke about is that our lines could be refreshed prior to having it deteriorated. So talking to Kevin, I think we can, and the city manager, we can do that every spring unless it needs to happen beforehand. Because if you look around town at our crosswalks, a lot of things, it just needs restriping and refresh. So if we do that every year, I think that's going to be a plus to help out with things. But again, we have to recognize that it's a crosswalk, and that gets into how serious are we about this, or the perception if there was one, because the brick pavers may look pretty, but they're not necessarily functional. A lot of people do not understand that that is a crosswalk, especially once the lines, white lines on either side get faded. Because most time there's a distinction with diagonal white striping to say that's a crosswalk. So that's something we may want to look at if we want to paint over the bricks, remove the bricks in the future, whatever the case may be. But I think we're gonna have to look at all of the stats if that's something we want to do. Signage and lighting, again, we talked about, what about the silent policeman? That's the figure to the left, person is puts right in the middle of the roadway. Typically, from a public works standpoint, and I don't want to speak for the fire companies, they're not too happy with that. And the reason why, and I would somewhat agree, because they have a tendency of moving around, or you have to sit there and bolt them in the ground. In summertime, year-round now times on Rehoboth Avenue, we have parking in a lot of areas on both sides and the median on the outside. So if you have an emergency vehicle coming down, where's the cars go? So therefore, they move to the side as far as they can, and the ambulance or fire truck or the police officer has to go down the middle of the roadway, and they're going to hit those signs. They're about $400 a piece. So you do have that added figure, but it does could cause damage to some of the vehicles as they go underneath the car, because you almost have come to a complete stop and go really, really slow over top of them when they bend over. So sometimes that comes problematic. The one thing I think we could do on Rehoboth Avenue is add not that I want more signage, but the yellow signage that's showing it's a walkway with the arrow down. But on the same post, we'd have to sit there and make it a crosswalk, just like at First and Second Street, and you could push a button, and then you'd have the flasher yellow and white strobe LEDs to signify that it's a walkway, somebody's crossing. Another type of lighting that's become more popular in the cities is, again, you would push a button to say you're crossing, but it's mounted right in the roadway, and it's little arrows that light up, and that may be something we want to look at in the future and price out.
Hey, Chief, can I
Yes.
ask a quick question
Yes.
about lighting, if you don't mind? Is there, I mean, and I have no expertise whatsoever in this. I've just noticed in other towns, I mean, sometimes they have like reflecting lights or something in front of, on either side of the crosswalk. Is that part of the lighting you're thinking about?
Yeah, that's what I was talking about, and they actually show like a little arrow on the ground. They're mounted right in the asphalt down, and I'm not sure how they're hooked up. They're not solar.
Okay.
I've had some practical experience with those flashing lights, the ones that are, I guess, on the posts, and I find they work really well. They're where I have a place in Florida. People stop for them. They really do, because all of a sudden it just lights up and it's visible. I think I don't know the roadway ones. I haven't seen them. Maybe they are better. I don't know, but I do know that these others seem to work.
The ones that Dewey just put in, aren't they on they're on the street, right? There was one set they put down there.
I have not seen
Okay,
those, I'm sorry.
yeah, it just went in recently, and I think they're the one. But I agree, the ones that are further up are also quite effective.
We have to be cognizant about sight lines and crosswalks to make sure they remain clear and allow both pedestrians and drivers time to identify and react to a crosswalk. Again, making sure that they can identify it, that it's a crosswalk. But again, we can't have, we're constantly aware of the greenway and beautification. But like coming up to the traffic circle in different areas, we have bushes and branches and some trees that takes away from the sidewalks. So that's one thing we could do, is be more cognizant in the future when we're looking at streetscapes or whatever at any intersections, as far as how close we want to bring up the shrubbery and keep that maintained. Again, this was just some poor visibility examples. At the traffic circle, there's a crosswalk on both sides. Depending on what direction you're going, you do not understand that there's a crosswalk until you've already committed yourself around, and then you're right on top of it. So again, obviously we're not going to do anything with the lighthouse, but we need to be cognizant, because in most traffic circles like that around the nation, if you look, they don't have landscaping up around the traffic circle to be able to see. And again, the picture to the right is some bushes and trees. I will say those bushes have been taken out now, and just the trees have been trimmed. Again, but on the other side, we have the same issue with flowers that grow up. So areas that I think we could focus on and get started on is 3rd Street, 4th Street, and 5th Street. I say those because 1st and 2nd blocks are already regulated by the traffic lights and intersection. I think they're working well. And up by the bandstand, there's another crosswalk. But they're already slowing down to go into the bandstand area, and I haven't seen any issues or concerns there. And when you're coming out to hit it westbound, there's a yield sign there, and people are already stopping for the most part to merge onto the 2 lanes on Rehoboth Avenue. So that's why I think we could focus on 2nd, 3rd, and 4th by maybe putting one of those earlier lights I was saying, and showing that it's truly a crosswalk and identifying those again. And as far as the 2 crosswalks on both sides of the traffic circle, I think we have enough signage in that area. And also, I think it's just monitoring the growth, see if we have to trim anything back, and just with landscape maintenance. And maybe that might be an area about to see what it would cost to have those arrow lights on the roadway.
Chief, you have 3rd, 4th, and 5th Street. I know that as far as a crosswalk from 3rd, like from Cultured Pearl all the way up to, might even be the Circle. There's no crosswalk. I mean, if you want to go to Dogfish, you're running across, you're jaywalking.
Correct.
I mean, there's just no 2 ways about it. And some years ago, we talked about, in fact, the transportation or streets and transportation group came up with an idea of where a crosswalk could go. I think it would be nice if we could evaluate that again, because I think that that's a problem area. You take your chances, and so far, I guess people haven't been hit, but
No,
running across, they're jaywalking. Everybody jaywalks there.
exactly. Well,
Get to the cars, because the cars at the median, there's no way to
right.
get to them otherwise. Yeah.
Are you suggesting a mid-block?
Well,
And there is that one
Crosswalk.
down at State Road.
yeah, but it's an awful long, I forget how many thousands of feet. I'm thinking of, it's not exactly mid-block. If you look at where Grub is, and there's a cut, curb cut there, and then if that could connect to the curb cut over there at the Crosswinds Motel, it's kind of mid-block, but also, there's some idea that
That tends to be a very busy area.
it very, and it's probably just going to just get busier.
No, I don't think any of us disagree with that. Matter of fact, when the 3 of us met, that was one thing that was pointed out to us. I mean, we already knew about it, obviously, but it was, as mentioned, anybody wants to go to any of the restaurants that's popping up on that side is a distinct advantage. They are jaywalking. So, yes, it's something that could be looked at a future with a crosswalk. And it is a state-maintained road. We would want to work with the state on that.
What's a state-maintained road?
Rehoboth Avenue.
Right.
Oh, I didn't, I just didn't.
Yes, I'm sorry. Okay.
So when you're
Give us
talking
some
about,
money along the way to do it.
Yeah, if you say so.
you're talking about 3rd, 4th, and 5th, you're talking about 3rd, 4th, and 5th, not
Yeah,
Rehoboth Avenue?
yes, and Pat Calusi had
As they
mentioned about
cross the
possibility of a new crosswalk.
Oh, as they cross. Okay,
Yeah,
okay,
so
that's-
she had
thanks,
talked about
that's
the
what I thought.
possibility of a new crosswalk, and I said that, as a state-maintained road, even though we do most of the maintenance, I would think we'd want to involve them.
On your areas of focus, something you mentioned earlier is you do think we should go ahead and repaint the white every spring. Are you just assuming that that's something we'll do, or is that part of your area of focus? That you
I think that's something we're just automatically going to do, talking with the city manager and Kevin, just put it on our list that it needs to be refreshed, and if it needs it before then, to go ahead. It's not all just paint. There's some specialized
Thermoplastic.
thermoplastic that goes down there too. So it's one of those things, might be taking that up and just paint it. I don't know, but things to look at to refresh. And the circle and all that would definitely help as people yielding, because you can spell out the yield sign and all that's on the ground too, as well as that light to help out with that. I did want to point out in this slide about the education component of it. I know the city has always been big on education. Through the Office of Highway Safety grants, we go out, do 4-hour blocks during the summer months, spring and summer, sometimes in the fall, sometimes up to twice, 3 times a week or whatever, and we stand out at intersections, and can be all the intersections on Rehoboth Avenue primarily, and we sit there and hand out this literature. And it was made out for Route 1 about crossing and be safe, but it applies here in town. And we're trying to thank people for using the crosswalk, and if they're not, or they're going across when it's not appropriate, we're sitting there bringing it to their attention and give them some literature. This is not a campaign that we're giving out any citations for. It's really strictly education and trying to thank people for doing the right thing and to be observant, so maybe if they see us standing there waiting, that they'll decide to sit there and wait. But I think we're doing that, but anything we do, as we mentioned, the biggest issue that we have is jaywalking. And again, it depends on how serious we want to get into it. Actually, I'm head of law enforcement. There's really not been a trend in the past necessarily to really, I won't say enforce it, because we have to sit there and address it, and that's why we do that through education. But with the visitors, businesses, and things, try to work with everybody at the time. But that may be a component to that we have to get serious at if we are identifying there's a problem and we want people to use the crosswalk. So does anybody have any specific questions? I think this was really down and dirty and fast. Like I said, we just talked about it last week. There's things I think we can do to improve, but things we would need to have some input so we can put on the budget that we began working on already for next year, and try to get somebody in here and actually decide how much it would cost to put certain lighting in. But I do think definitely those 3 blocks, we can sit there and get something started relatively quickly.
Well, thank you. You know what, I think it's useful to have those statistics, and while I'm relieved that there haven't been any serious issues, this is one of those things they always say with parking, and perception is reality. We have plenty of parking, but perception is we don't. And the same is true of pedestrian safety. I can't tell you how many people this summer express concerns to me, and of course what your statistics don't include are the near misses, and I've had several myself. And so there is a perception that we really aren't doing enough with, for pedestrian safety, and it's not that the city's not doing enough. It's maybe that the drivers have become more aggressive, or that they aren't stopping when they should, even when someone is in the crosswalk. So the one thing, and I love the decorative. I know you said that it could maybe restripe, and we have our decorative brick and we have our stripe, and I guess I wonder if there's a way to do something that's a happy medium where we don't lose the aesthetic, but we do highlight more of the crosswalk. And I think you said there is.
Again, well, it's really just painting, or if you painted over the bricks, I would sit there and think, again, we can sit there and keep our option open and see what's best fit and bring it back to everyone. At the end of the day, like I said, last week, for example, I was working patrol and pulled a car over for a person was in a crosswalk, and they kept going, so they had to back up, so they didn't, like one of your near misses. And the gentleman I pulled over, he was sincere. I did cite him for it, but I don't know that he really understood that was a crosswalk.
Really? Interesting.
He saw the person or whatever at the last moment, because the cars were parked on both sides. It was a busy evening, and I'll take them at their word, didn't necessarily see the lady crossing the sidewalk, but I sincerely think he did not realize that was actually
because
a crosswalk.
it was a decorative
decorative
fix, I guess, right? Yeah, that's interesting. Well, in terms of the signage, I mean, you and I talked about this when we met a few weeks ago, that more often than not, I see these silent policemen in the middle, at the as the picture on the left here is. I mean, I see it in Lewis. I saw it all over upstate New York when I was traveling there, but I take your point about people pulling aside for the emergency vehicles, and they're getting run over, and probably they're getting run over by cars too, because doesn't that happen on surf?
Right.
So
one article you may want, and I don't take one way or the other out of this, but one article you may want to look at is in the Cape Gazette in 2017. They did Lewis was looking at this about, should we add more, should not, in the discussion back and forth.
Yeah.
And I thought was very interesting, and somebody wanted to pull that up.
Oh, yeah, that is interesting. But if we ended up going for the signs on the side, then I would just want it to say stop. And instead of just to the person figure, that somehow, that we kind of merge these two together and say stop, because, that's the other thing I usually see.
Well, we would have to look at, we'd have to make sure it complies with the state law.
Right.
Again, I guess the city could always decide to change their ordinance. Lewis has a different ordinance than the state law. But otherwise, we would have to say, we could say stop when pedestrians are in the crosswalk.
right.
But,
Yeah, that's what it would
we
be.
can't say stop for
Right, no, I get it. It
pedestrian.
would have to have all of the word, yeah. And I mean, and what's music to my ears is the possibility of lighting, because frankly, I didn't know where we'd be able to do it, if we'd be able to do it because of cost, but obviously, there are going to be some critical intersections, and maybe the circle where that's really the best solution, and I'm glad you said that.
Kevin and I will work with the city manager, and she'll give us direction as far as what we need to get some prices on from your input.
Yeah, as I look at that, I think we'd be hard-pressed to remove any of the bricks or paint over the bricks. So I think the thermoplastic, if we can update those, I think that would be a good thing, because those are reflective. People do see them whether it's day or night. I think that's a very positive thing. And, we could do that at every one of those crosswalks, because I don't know when the last time we did it, but I'm sure it's a number of years. But also, I would suggest, recently I've seen in a place where I've visited, this sign that has, that you showed back right next to the silent policeman. If you can skip back a few, 5 or 6 slides. Keep going. This one, the one to the right of the silent policeman.
Right.
If we could, maybe that might be a good thing to have at each one of the crosswalks in each way. But simultaneously, as Commissioner Cluzy said, because I've been to the same place she's speaking about, the lights make a big difference. If we could have that with a light with a push a button, one on each side,
exactly.
I think that gets everybody. And I think you could even do that at the circle. And, because I think putting the lights
Right.
down underneath the bricks, you got to take out the bricks. But I think in a bright, sunny day,
Right.
you don't see those. And there are already on the yield signs, those red
That's what
things.
I said, there's already some signage
So,
up that way.
I think those work it, but I think each one of the crosswalks on Rehoboth Avenue, if we could update the thermoplastic and maybe consider this type of sign with a light on, I guess, higher rather than lower, because what I've noticed this summer is more and more people are slowing down in the crosswalks. I know our communications director put up on the sign, said, please kind of slow down and cross, because right outside of the city hall, that is a major crosswalk.
Yes.
And I saw people slowing down. But again, when you have 2 lanes of traffic going both ways and everybody's hunting for a parking space, it gets a little bit difficult. But I think the more things that we could have out there to get people's attention, the better.
No, Mayor, I 100% agree. And again, I wasn't really thinking that we would take the bricks out. It's just I want to be upfront about it and say how far,
I understand.
how serious or how far did we want to sit there and look at it. If anybody's ever in the Dover area by the Dover Hospital Bay Health, they're using just that. Is one that I know is with the yellow signage with the crosswalk, and underneath of it's the LED, and it really works well. I mean, daytime and nighttime to slow
And it's
people down.
above, it's raised, it's above.
It's raised, but it's not too tall, as Mayor said. You don't want it
Yeah.
too far up. It wants to be
yeah.
be lower.
Perfect, that's perfect.
And it works well.
In another community I've spent time in, they have crosswalks, and they have a busy avenue, kind of like Rehoboth Avenue, but it's only 2 lanes. So they can have the silent policeman, it's easier. Whereas I think on Rehoboth Avenue, having silent policemen there, we have big trucks going by, we have people changing lanes, looking for parking space. I think it becomes problematic. But in this place, they have a little sign up that says the 3 Ws, and then they have painted on the crosswalk itself for the walkers to wait, wave, walk. So it's kind of like wait, see where your point is, and then stick your hand up as you're walking out there and walk across. And people do it. I mean, but So that's a,
Well,
I think with
no,
that
I think
signage,
that
that helps a lot.
something like that works too, because I know we've had it's been very successful, just the painting the stenciling on about don't ride your bike on a sidewalk, how that's helped. So I think people do pay attention, they want to do the right thing. It's just making sure they're aware of it.
Yeah, and I think as we go through this thing with merge and signage, I think there will be more communication with, maybe some of those signs could mention crosswalk ahead or something like that. Or, something else as we go to the circle, maybe we paint, like we've painted the bicycle sign on the sidewalks, maybe we paint in the lanes a yield sign right before you come to the circle. Because technically, everybody that comes to the circle has to yield on the ground.
Right.
Just
I
like
think
a
there
white-
actually is with the ad, I think it just needs getting refreshed.
Yeah,
So, yes.
something like that. Great.
Chief, could you speak to other municipalities that have, I guess, a more pedestrian-friendly ordinance rather than what the state law is? And is that something that we want to entertain?
As far as the only one that I'm really familiar with that changed theirs is Lewis. That's been many, many years. It seems to be working well. As far as changing, I don't know that we need to change that ad. I think we can sit there and do things, as we said, with some signage and LEDs and see how that goes. Again, they got a different, unique area down there. Ours is a little bit more congested and more busier. And again, any new law you put in the books, are we willing to do that? It goes back to as far as enforcement. Are you willing to sit there and hit all the jaywalkers? Are you willing to sit there? Because otherwise, you're just changing the law for a feel-good measure, but you're not really accomplishing a whole lot.
I don't know if Lewis also has bins on poles at crosswalks that
Yes.
have yellow flags in them, and you take a flag and wave it as you go through the crosswalk.
So, and they're successful in their town, but it's just a different, we're
But,
a little
yeah,
different.
there's no street in Lewis like Rehoboth Avenue. Rehoboth Avenue is like Route 1.
My kids love the yellow flags.
Right. That's why I said we could, but it's, I don't know that it's really would work out here. That's why I think this measure would go a long way.
That's fair.
Yeah, Chief, thank you for your very practical approach to this that we all have concerns about, and thank you for the proposed solutions that you've identified in your presentation.
Again, thank you very much. Again, it was with Kevin and Sharon. We can obviously drill down a little bit further, but it does sound like that I need to work with city manager and Kevin and start getting some price quotes on the signage and the LEDs and see what that could cost for upcoming budget.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chief.
I'll take this back to Streets and Transportation. They'll be thrilled to see it. Thanks.
Okay, we're going to move back on to E. Back to you, Susan.
So I'm not going to start over because I already
No,
gave my
yep.
sort of little introduction, but the upshot of the exercise was that I actually found a way that I think will involve more people in our committees because, and let me back up one step and just say that what I looked at, and again, I didn't just wake up one day and decide to, what are our committees like? And I don't know the makeup of ours, by the way. On the sheet that you submitted, I don't know all those people. So I have no idea how all of them match up right now. So these are sort of general encompassing guidelines. And they would not, there are a few exceptions. The 3-person committees are exempted from what I'm about to say, the Audit Committee and Personnel, and obviously Budget and Finance includes all of us. So it's the other 8 sort of citizen committees, for lack of a better word, that I'm really focusing on here.
Susan, just real quick, is there, just for context, did you start with the existing committee handbook that was passed in June of 2018 and build
I
on
actually,
that?
interesting that you
Is
should
that
mention
kinda
that
what
because I had forgotten about it initially when this first came up a couple months ago, but I did look at it within the last few weeks, and it tied in very well to what I'm about to say. So, I mean, but, at the same time, I think the first draft of that included criteria, but somewhere along the way, because it was draft 8 that got passed, that got dropped out. And sure enough, yes, in the first version of that, there is a paragraph about criteria, and I don't know what happened, but that got dropped out along the way. So, so this was an attempt to see more you know, not just focusing in on specific criteria, but looking at what other communities do and looking not about individuals, because we have lots of knowledgeable people everywhere around the whole area, but really about the most appropriate roles that people can play. And that's how it came up to be a real opportunity here. Because what I found in other communities, as I said before, is that they generally require, you know, Dewey's the only exception of that, of the coastal communities, they do require members of committees to be either residents or property owners. And several years ago, we sort of expanded beyond that for good reason, to understand that some people are coming in with expertise, specific expertise to the role of that committee. But what I learned was that there's room to do that and to still have a committee of citizens. And I'm gonna use the shorthand term citizens so that I don't have to keep saying residents and property owners. So citizens means, in this context, residents and property owners. And that is that outside experts or people outside the community can participate as non-voting members. And that way they're there to give their expertise, but they're not, you know, they're not, and many of these committees, I know with our tree group, for instance, we don't really formally vote, you know, on anything, but we do have consensus, and it's conceivable that some of the other committees, you know, would vote to bring issues forward. So having these non-voting members would allow them to participate, and it would allow the maximum involvement of local citizens. So there's two other points to that where I thought it really got interesting, and I wasn't even looking for this, it just came up as I was doing the research, is how other communities view commissioners on committees. And I know that we used to have a tradition here that all the committees were chaired by a commissioner, and 2 of the other 5 towns still sort of do that. But 4 of the 5 towns limit the number of commissioners who can be on a committee, and they also define the role as either liaison or ex officio, meaning non-voting member. And once again, this occurred to me as a great way to maximize the citizen participation on the committee while at the same time having commissioners there. In fact, the woman at Dewey, I think, put it best. She told me that they view, because they have a commissioner liaison on every committee by design, by guideline. And she said the reason for that is that those people are a conduit of information from the committee back to the commissioners, which, you know, makes perfect sense. And it would seem to me that if we establish, again, the 8 committees I was talking about, as consisting of our citizens and with possibly one place on it for, well, we have many business owners that are residents or property owners, so I'm not really sure where the business owner component fits in there, because that's included within residents and property owners in some cases. But that others are non-voting at the discretion of the chair, that the total number would be at the discretion of the chair, not trying to limit here. If anything, I think there's an attempt to expand. So the last piece I'll say before opening this up for discussion is that I wanted to see, do we actually have enough people to serve? You know, or are we a community like many around the country that go begging and have vacancies? And I was very pleased to see, I took a look at all the applications that have come in the last several years, and I'm pleased to note that we have enough people to fill our committees, and I think that's wonderful. It speaks so well of community involvement here. And actually, the Environmental Committee is the perfect example, because for 2 reasons. One, it's just now getting formed. Secondly, it had a press release. And you know, several people mentioned me, well, that we could use a press release for our committee. And maybe we should do that every year, because not everyone is aware, you know, people forget over time, so it might be a good thing. But having that press release brought in a number of applications. I didn't count them, I'd say 12 to 15. And the good news is there are enough city citizens to fill that committee, along with the possibility of some outside experts also working with that committee. So it's a great test case of starting a new committee the way that would involve more people. So that's and commissions is a separate issue, but I was going to do committees first.
Well, let me just step in, and then somebody else can if they like. You know, first of all, you know, the committee structure in the city was started a number of years ago, and pretty much so dropped by the wayside over time, because the previous administration really didn't want to look too much into what committees were going to put in front of the commissioners. I thought, when I came in, I thought, you know what, the committee structure, I think, is important. It's a great way to get people in the community involved. And we actually jump-started a couple of committees. There were a couple committees that had sat dormant, and we created a couple new ones. And I think that's all positive. I took a little different tact in saying that, you know, it didn't have to be a commissioner running a committee. I know that had been in the past, but some commissioners wanted to run a committee, and some commissioners didn't want to run a certain committee. So I went out and, you know, asked specific people to be chairs. I also took it a little bit different. I didn't appoint the committee members. I went to the chairs, and I may have had a suggestion here or there, but I went to the chairs. I said, look, you know, take this into consideration. We have applications. Let's look at, you know, what you think might be important people to put on committees based on experience, based on how much time they've been here, whatever they can add to the final outcome of the committees. I look at the citizens, if you will, not only property owners as well as residents, but businesses. We've got, I think, I don't know, 300 businesses in town, and it's a very important part of our community. And whether they own property or not, they're here every day. And I think they are great additions. And that's why I think a number of the committee chairs have gone out and brought in business people, because I think they're very important in our future. And, you know, again, from a visitor's perspective, these are the people that are drawing the visitors. The residents aren't drawing the visitors. As far as people outside of town that aren't property owners, I look at people that have stakeholders in the city. You may live right outside of town and, you know, right across the canal, but you can bring some expertise to a committee. I'm willing to think about that, and I think chairs should be too. I think, for example, there's a fellow on the Animal Issues Committee. I'm not exactly sure where he lives, but he definitely doesn't live in town, but he's an expert on animals.
One of the ones I was
And
thinking
so,
of, yeah.
you know, my feeling is, again, I look at the chairs to put in a voting versus a non-voting member. You know, I don't know. I look at the chairs to say, okay, is 5 enough? Is 9 too much? That's completely up to them. And so it's more of what we can do from a committee perspective or a commission perspective for the city. And that's why the people that I've gone out and suggested here or nominated here, I put in there, because I think this is a fair way to get all the stakeholders involved, because there are people that come across the bridge every day, every single day, and they're just as important to the community in my mind, because they do have ideas about what makes us tick.
Do they have the same stake as our taxpayers?
I would say everybody's got the opportunity to voice an opinion.
Well, no question about that. No question about that. And in fact,
They
the other
don't
thing.
vote.
Huh?
They don't
They
vote.
don't vote, but the one, let me back up a step and also say that I was very proud that this year that our Planning Commission did something I don't think we've ever done in any CDP process before, and that was to create a survey specific for visitors. And I don't remember exactly how many people filled it out. It's 300 and something, and I assume a lot of them are from the outlying area and not, you know, summer visitors. But, you know, we did that specifically because they're important stakeholders. In addition, we have 18 civic organizations that work within the city. So there's lots of opportunities for stakeholders to make their voices known. I mean, look at the free speech, you know, the events ordinance that came up and all the people that came in to talk about that. Clearly, stakeholders have an opportunity to speak. But when it comes to, and Commissioner Schlosser asked me if I had looked at the handbook, the role and the expanded role of committees, and as I said, I think that's wonderful, the expanded role of committees over the last few years, but specifically, they are identifying community issues, recommending policies and procedures, and enhancing the quality of life for the people who live here. So I would ask, what justifies the opinion of a non-resident, non-property owner, non-business owner, I agree businesses should be in the mix, over a resident? I don't think they have the same stake, though I think they bring expertise, which is why I want to create a model that includes everyone. I don't think the goal of inclusion is met when you exclude residents. And right now, some residents who want to be on committees are not on committees because that spot is taken up by a person outside the city.
That's not necessarily the case.
Susan, thank you. So is that the problem that you're trying to solve with this proposal of yours?
Inclusion of people in the city who want to be involved in committee work and not having and not having voting members be stakeholders outside the city. To have input from them, but not to have them.
That's a current problem.
It's
that you're trying to
it's
solve
been
with this.
yes. In fact, as I said, several people. I already knew that we had people outside the city serving on committees, and frankly, I hadn't given it much thought until people started asking me about it. And they ask about it in two contexts. Several people sort of said, "Well, gee, you know, it's other places don't do this," and they weren't talking about coastal communities. They're talking about most of the communities in the country, and it's true, And after I looked into it, I realized, okay. And then the other thing was the person who had wanted to be on a committee and didn't. So it's twofold, and it's really more of looking at best practices, because we have not up to this point haven't had any guidelines. So I'm suggesting we may want to start having guidelines to encompass all of the inclusivity that we've embraced over the last few years and find the appropriate place to put it.
Well, I can say, one, I don't think there's any data that suggests what best practice would be in terms of doing this. Secondly, we're very different than most other cities and communities in that we are surrounded by stakeholders who view Rehoboth Beach as their city. That's not necessarily true in many, many, many communities. I think of the Animal Issues Committee that I have chaired and served on for a number of years. We have 2 out of town members who may be the most active in the sense that they bring expertise to the real work of that committee that would not get done very well if they were not on that committee. And so, again, this is their community.
I mean, I think any resort town, and the smaller it is, the more its stakeholders are outside. I mean, I think it's just a fact anywhere. It could be said of Hilton Head, it could be said of Ocean City, it could be said of a lot of places. And I also consider myself a stakeholder in Lewis. I go to Lewis all the time. I go to Dewey a lot. But I don't think Lewis or Dewey would invite me to be on any of their committees.
Have you asked?
No. I shouldn't say, I haven't asked for myself personally, can I be on them? But I did, in the course of this research, talk to city, staff at every town who told me, no, we wouldn't allow that. I wasn't asking for myself, I was asking it for a general. So again, I would hope our guidelines would be much more enlightened than these other towns that I have on my chart to compare us to. But at the same time, I don't know what justifies the opinion of a non-resident over a resident. I just don't get it.
I think that Commissioner Byrne brought up a really good point. Without the 2 individuals that are currently on the Animal Issues Committee, we probably wouldn't have the expertise. Right. And to say, oh, let them be on the committee and not be voting. Well, anybody can come to any of our meetings. They're all open, and people can, then give their opinions. But when you make these people who are important to that committee a member who votes, who are important to the function of that committee, I think it's important that they do vote. So the fact that they're outside of town, but they bring something important to the committee is what we should be looking at here. And I don't agree that we should just expand the committees with people who want to be on the committee to some number that makes it the committee, somewhat in my opinion, non-functional. There can be too many members. They can participate as the audience, which is always open to people to stand up, give their address, and give their opinion. We allow that at every meeting that we have. So that's my opinion on this.
Well, I agree that the total number of members should be at the discretion of, and I know that there are some chairs who really prefer having a small group, I get that. And there's also the other end of the extreme, I guess, is our tree group, when Tony told me basically that everybody that had applied, accepted, we have a group of 10, and if we were to adopt this model, then Dick and I would become ex officio, and I would be perfectly happy with that. So it depends on the committee, it depends on the chair. I'm not trying to limit the total number. That would be at the discretion of the chair. All I'm trying to say is if we have a minimum, and I'm assuming for these 8 committees, the minimum's probably 5, that those 5 should be our citizens, and anyone else is in addition to that. Our citizens, including business owners, I'll throw that in.
You know, again, if I look back on the previous administration, the way it was done was the mayor picked all of the members.
And I don't want that.
No, I realize that. And just so you know, for many years, I listened to many property owners say, why can't I be on a committee?
Right, okay.
And it happened, you know, so it's not all of a sudden property owners
I know,
are just
yeah.
asking now. And, you know, the way I look at this, it's, again, the stakeholders, the people involved, and, you know, once we pick the chairs, there are a lot of people out there that put in applications, and a lot of them are actually on the committees. And some of the chairs say, okay, I'd rather have 5 than 9 because that's the most efficiency. I'd rather have 9 than 5 because I like ideas. I don't think in any way are we saying that, you know, this guy or woman outside of town's vote is better or the same as the person in here, or excuse me, the other way around, that a property owner isn't as important. They're very important. You know, these committees are all volunteer. These committees aren't elected. We are elected. And so if, you know, and so there are rules from that perspective, but I'm looking at the whole here. How do we make it better as a whole? And again, I can't, you know, I think it was brought out, this community, you go everywhere I run into somebody in town, they say, well, I wanted to vote for so-and-so, but I couldn't. I live in Rehoboth. And the thing is, you know, there are a lot of people that live in Rehoboth Beach, but that don't live in town. There are a lot of people that come here all the time, whether they rent a house or they own a house or they just stay in hotels. And they love coming back and back and back. And if some people want to provide some kind of expertise that the chairs of these committees think are worthwhile, I think that's better, because some of the people that want to be on committees just want to be on committees. And I don't know that they're necessarily, and a lot of it has to do with how many people can actually make it. And I think a lot of these people that are living right outside the community are here all the time and can make the monthly meetings, where some property owners can't.
Yeah, I think I'd be more concerned if we saw examples of committees just being the majority of the people were not citizens, as Susan defined them, or business owners, and they could actually influence outcome. You know, I think from what I've seen, they enhance outcome, and so I don't see a real downside. And so I like what the mayor said as far as his philosophy for, you know, the volunteer nature of it, folks who have a passion for some of these things and have skills and have the ability to come to the meetings and make positive contributions should have strong consideration.
So in taking something, again, it's just an example because it's recent, I'm not picking on your, Dick, with the Environmental Committee. I was just thrilled to see the number of people that had come forward. So if we already have 7 city citizens that want to participate in that committee, we're going to leave some of them out in order to have some of the 5 applicants that were from outside the city?
I think that'll be up to the new chair of the committee to assess and evaluate the applications. I mean,
I guess I would just ask
it's
who
my
we
sense
serve,
that committees are currently working well, and so I don't see a problem that we're trying to solve here. And the committees are fluid. as well. If, you know, if in mid-year, a citizen or two comes forward and fills out an application for the Animal Issues Committee, I'm not going to say, you know, wait if they,
Well, I actually thought we did. I thought the appointments were for a year.
well, they are. But I think what I'm saying is that at least my attitude with the Animal Issues Committee has been to be very inclusive. People that have an interest, a genuine interest, they understand the mission, they understand the responsibility, that we're going to consider them. And so with the new committee, I think looking at a balance of how to move the at least as we've structured it thus far before the new committee comes up with a more solid mission. It's going to be a balance.
Well, I would just hope you don't leave out our city stakeholders.
Well, that would not be the intention. Yeah.
It never is.
And I guess before I say anything else on, so that's committees. On commissions, I guess I don't know the people on the planning commission that you've appointed. Are all of them residents or property owners? Because I was going to talk
No.
about planning commission in general, but I didn't know the people, I didn't know the status, so.
Not all of them. One is not a property owner presently, just sold the property. Otherwise, everyone else are property owners.
Okay.
But in the planning commission, you do not have to be a property owner or a resident.
The state code is silent on that, but again, the coastal municipalities, and the reason I looked at them is because they have open, you know, we're one of 10 municipalities in the country that has non-resident voting, so those are the standards that are often used for commission and committee appointments here too. That's what sets us apart from every other community in America. But I think there's a stark contrast between what a committee can do and what a commission should do. Because we are, by opening up, and again, this is about process. This is not about individual people. I've been working on this before I even knew who the individuals were. So by opening up a commission that makes a legally binding decision on a site plan to non-residents and non-property owners who don't even qualify to vote here, that person could be the deciding vote on a development proposal that affects us. Is that really what we want?
Just let me go back to what I said. It is not a property owner or a resident. Again, they just recently sold their property.
I
They're in
get,
the
yeah,
process
I
of
understand,
buying
that's
one.
now, yeah.
They are a business owner.
I got it.
2 businesses in town.
Right.
I look at that as a stakeholder as well.
But, okay, then in that case, should we have a guideline that says, because right now, that's not what we're doing. Right now, we're opening it up beyond where we've ever opened it before. So before, it's been residents and property owners. We've now opened the door to
I don't
a
know that
business owner.
that's a fact, but
Well, we
just
have.
for the last
So
2 years.
but in the future, somebody could come along and say, oh, well, there's a non-resident, non-property owner on there, let's name somebody from out in the county. It doesn't mean you would do that, but if with absent guidelines, we have set a precedent. And what I'm saying is,
The state does not
should
have
we state?
guidelines on this,
Huh,
and I'm going
know.
with the state.
But several other communities do have guidelines.
That's
They almost all
fine.
do.
We're Rehoboth Beach, as Sam Cooper used to
So,
always say.
so we can open it up, so we've set a precedent, we can open it up to anybody. I know you wouldn't, not talking about you, not talking about the individuals. I'm talking about a precedent created for people that do not have the same stake and are making legally binding decisions for our citizens and taxpayers. And we have opened the door, unless we set a guideline that says we're now going to have on our planning commission residents and non-property owners and businesses. If we say that, then we've set a guideline and we've limited it to a degree. But if we don't say that, we've opened the door.
But we have a check and balances, and I mean, relative to the fact that although the mayor can nominate folks to the commissions, the this group of 7 does vote. So do you think that that's kind of at least a check and balance?
I think it's the mayor's job. I mean, I don't disagree that it's his job to nominate.
No, I'm saying that there's a check and balance. I'm sorry.
But I don't see it. I don't really see that being acted on. I mean, I think if the mayor selects someone, you can make any number of justifications for it. You could make a justification in the future that there's an architect lives right outside of town. And I know that Lewis's Historical Commission has done exactly that. They on one of their commissions, they have non-residents because it was specific to historic preservation and architecture, and it was specific to that commission. So you can always make a rationale for it. That's why I was saying if we wanted to have, if we're going to go outside the norm, not only of what we have always done, but what other communities do we want to set guidelines for what we do in the future, given that the area has grown and our processes have changed and all that?
You know my point of view. Anybody else?
No, I stated my position on this as well. I think that, you know, there's already a lot of rigor that is involved in the process. I think Commissioner Schlosser made a good point, is that the mayor is empowered to make recommendations. He has reached out to all of us individually and shared the information with us beforehand, and we all have an opportunity to provide our feedback. And so we still vote on the slates of committee members and commission members, and there is a check and balance in place.
Well, I guess I have one last question for you, and that is, I know that you were talking about committees earlier and how you talked to all the chairs, right, about their recommendations for the committees, right?
Yeah.
Did you talk to the chair of the Planning Commission about his recommendations for replacements from the Planning Commission?
I spoke to him about them.
About did you get his recommendations for who he would recommend for the Planning Commission? Since he's been the chair for
No.
10. Okay. And this is a committee, again, it's not a committee, it's a commission that makes legally binding decisions. And so my other point, and I'll just share this with the audience, because you talk about the state code. I actually recommended a few weeks ago to you that we adopt the state code for our Planning Commission. Because right now, we're kind of hamstrung with our Planning Commission. We have 9 members. By our code, we have 9 members. The only other community that has 9 members on their Planning Commission is Lewis. All the others have 5 or 7. And the state code allows a range, not less than 5 nor more than 9. That's the state code. If we put that language in our state code, it would give us flexibility for moving that number around as needed. And my concern this year is that, and I realize I'm part of the problem here, because the reason there are 4 vacancies is because I had to leave. But we're also introducing 4 new members at a critical time of site plan review and the CDP. And frankly, I feel like the whole process is going to have to completely start over. That all those applicants are going to be starting over, because while 4 is not a majority, it's obviously as close as you can get. Furthermore, and I mentioned this to you as well, I feel very strongly about Planning Commission because I served there for 2 years. I know how it works. And I think the new people that we've had on the last few years has been great. I've learned a great deal from them. They've brought new expertise to the Planning Commission, and your pattern the last couple of years has been to appoint, where there's 3 vacancies every year, to reappoint 1 person for continuity and to appoint 2 new ones. That has worked very well. All of a sudden, we have double the number. We have no one being kept and double the number. And there's such a thing as group dynamics in a process like this. So you have a group that's worked together and you introduce 1 or 2 new people, and it works. You have a process like this and you introduce 4 new people and the group dynamic changes, and frankly, the whole process of the CDP scares me.
Well, could you consider that the group dynamics could get better? Looks to me that the CDP has been put off for a year. Why? From my point of view, maybe the group dynamics weren't that good, since now it's been postponed.
No, it's been put off so that we can have the same level of public involvement that we'd had before. And to some extent, it was slowed down because of the inclusion of a survey, which again is a positive development, but it took time to do it and time to administer it. And the responses were so great that it takes time to analyze it. So it is to encompass the expanded public process is the reason it was delayed. That's really it. It wasn't because of any lack of work on our part. But that's my, the other point I was making about the membership is a general guideline for years in the future. The point I make about adopting state code or the makeup of the current commission is specific to this year and is specific to the fact that for the first time in a long time, there are 4 vacancies, not 3, and that we're not retaining anyone, and that we are at a critical time when I think that is most unfortunate.
So you think it would be better to go to 5? Because we have 5 members that have been there for a while?
No,
Okay, please.
7.
Or 7.
7.
Remember, when we had the conversation, I said I was thinking about that, and at that point in time, you said, oh, you didn't think that was a good idea.
I didn't say that, but go ahead. I'll tell you. Go ahead.
And because you said, you implied, as what previously happened, I suggested that change 10 years ago, and it went through, and then for political reasons, the next year it changed back. I think, from my perspective, number one, as Commissioner Calusi just said, our CDP process has been delayed, and has been delayed for a number of reasons. And I'm not going to go into the reasons, but we've got an extension of a year. So I think that's great. We've got 5 Planning Commission members that have been there for a number of years that can bring these other people along. However, these other people, from my perspective, bring a lot of expertise. And I think they bring new perspective and new ideas for a new CDP. And I think the future of Rehoboth is in very positive hands with this new Planning Commission.
Let me just make a couple of comments. When I made when you brought up and I brought up the fact that the Planning Commission had been reduced 10 years ago and that was very controversial, my point was only to suggest that it might be controversial again if you did that, because there might be people that remembered it. It was after that I started looking at ways to make that work, ways to make it so that who could object. And that's why the state code came into play, because I knew it was something you wanted to do. So by adopting the state code, it became a way to say, here, let's have flexibility as time dictates. And frankly, that's how I think you could sell the naysayers on it, or ignore the naysayers, because you're not reducing it, you're only giving yourself flexibility. In terms of the fact that there are 5, but they haven't been there for years. Remember, 3 of them now are ones you appointed just in the last 2 years. So if you go back, first of all, there are 0 people that worked on the 2010 plan. Now, that may be understood because it's been 10 years. Got it.
And that's half the point.
Oh, you didn't like the 2010 plan?
I didn't, that has
Anyway,
nothing to do
okay,
with it.
so there's 0 people. Now, with the passage of time, maybe that's to be expected. More importantly, there was a 2015 update, as is required by the state every 5 years. Only 2 remaining members, now 2015, not all that long ago, only 2 remaining members of the Planning Commission worked on that. So again, it's a whole, we might as well start over. We are starting over. And if that's what's desired, then let's say that's what's desired. We're starting over.
We have a new consultant.
Yes.
We have a new survey. We've never done that before.
Right. So we're starting over.
We're not starting over. I think this consultant brings a lot of experience.
Yep.
I think you've got the 4 or 5 members on there that have been working with the consultant over the last year. And I think these people that are being appointed are going to bring a lot of experience in this field. So I think it's a very positive thing. And I think what happens here with a broad, diverse group that we've gotten suggested now, everybody's going to feel a lot more comfortable speaking themselves. In the past 3 or 4 years, I've seen the Planning Commission, there's 3 or 4 people speaking.
Mm-hmm.
So, Mayor, I think this is a great discussion, just where I am right now, and I don't know if there's further discussion, but 2 things. One, there seems to be, and I'll open it up, but I think there's consensus to move forward with your slate, as is, to vote on that slate, proposed slate next meeting. And number 2, I think I'm not hearing, and again, open to anybody else's interpretation, really a consensus to revisit, the changing the committee guidelines at this point in time. That's what I'm hearing, just in terms of where we are at this point on this agenda item. That's just where I am, and I don't know
Yeah,
if
and I
it's-
agree.
I agree.
I agree as well.
All I can do is try to involve the people I was voted to represent. That's all.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Well, thank you. We're going to move right on to the last issue on the agenda, which F has been taken off the agenda. And we are moving right to G, which is discussion of the draft water tower lease agreement between the city of Rehoboth Beach and Verizon Wireless, and I think that's in your packet. Go ahead.
You want me to go over this? or
Oh,
you?
Yeah,
Sharon, I'm
this
sorry.
is, I'll just start by saying that you might recall 3 years ago, the Verizon folks came to us requesting to expand their territory. They didn't, in the summer months, they didn't have enough bandwidth for all of the wireless smartphones and iPads and mobile stations that were coming in here with 50 to 75,000 people. So they requested to put a cell on wheels at the then developing municipal complex that was granted that request, and the cell on wheels, or CAL, which was a stationary vehicle, stayed on the city property from June into September. Following year, they requested to put up, Verizon requested to put up a temporary structure on the water tower, which involved placing rings, antenna structures on the water tower. They were, for the same amount of contribution to the city, permitted to do that with the supervision from our IT department. And then that led to just this past summer, 2019, when in 2018 they requested to put a permanent structure up. That was not permitted because at the time the commissioners were undergoing this development of the wireless ordinance. So they kicked back and and were permitted again to put the temporary structure up. Now that the ordinance is in place, they have come to us for a more permanent structure, and that's what this ordinance is about. So the ordinance was developed along with Mr. Mandelis and their attorney. It was vetted back and forth, and I believe Mr. Mandelis can take it from here.
Yeah, I'm satisfied with the provisions. There were a few things dealing with indemnification, a few things dealing with confidentiality and whether the lease was able to be obtained through FOIA that we worked through, but all those things have been worked through. This is very consistent with other types of tower agreements that I've done, so I'm comfortable with it the way it is in its current form. If there are questions, I'm happy to answer them, though.
We vote on this next meeting, or are you just asking us for our consensus to allow the city manager and or mayor, whoever,
I
to
think you're
sign
bringing
it?
this to them for a vote, right? Yeah.
For a vote
So at the next meeting.
Yeah.
I just have one comment on that. I don't have any objections to this as is, but what I would like to see at the next meeting is just kind of what the plan is for the 1920 timeframe from the vendors. I mean, I don't want to keep asking one off, like, how does this impact? Where's it going to be? I would just like to see at this point what their investment, where they're putting towers, where they're putting small cells, just so we have the vision of what things are going to look like for the next year, so that we can see this as part of that overall vision, so we don't have to keep asking those questions. Do you understand what I'm asking for? I'd just like to see what towers they're going to put up, what other antennas they're going to put up for the next year, so this is just in the context of what the overall plan looks like for wireless implementation.
Yeah, I think I understand. So I think this particular set of antennas, if you will, covers a particular area. They're asking for additional that would need to be installed as part of the new ordinance in other areas closer to the boardwalk. So that's what you want to see in addition to this?
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah, exactly. Yeah, and again, I don't have any problems with the ordinance. I just would like to see the whole picture before we start doing piecemeal.
Right.
Yeah, thanks.
And then this is just for the towers.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. And Ann, you can put that on the next workshop, or next meeting for a vote, please.
Solicitor, is it normal in a lease agreement like this that without our consent, the lease can be assigned?
Yeah, this one, because they'd have to come to the city again for any facilities changes. What happens with a lot of the wireless vendors is they have so many sub-entities that end up they shift these things around. So it's not typically what I've seen. I haven't typically seen, a Verizon sell to Comcast or something like that. It's typically within their own organization. So those sorts of assignments happen. And this one does allow it to be assigned. It doesn't allow any changes to the equipment. It still has to be, still have to be ensure that there's no interference or any of those sorts of things.
Okay.
But if that gives you cause for concern, I will go back to them and ask that it.
No, your explanation makes perfect sense. It's just one thing that surprised me.
Yeah.
Great. Anything else? If not, we're going to move right into citizen comment. Mr. Brittingham, if you'd like to come up to the microphone.
I would have asked for a citizen comment. I asked for a question about the water tower. Recently, they're working on the park. Within the past 2 years, broke the sidewalk because they took a personnel lift across it. Maybe they were working on the water tank. And I've looked at the pictures of the water tank area. This has got to do with now Verizon and whoever it would be. But for access, and I mentioned this within the past year, how do they get to their equipment to maintain it? If you look at your picture, there's no gates out there, and we're paranoid about giving up parking spaces. There needs to be some thoughts about maybe losing a parking space or so to have an access gate out along 2nd Street. And a separate question, I just saw this today. I've had some problem downloading it. I'm not even sure that the gas tank is at an appropriate location. I don't know, it's been blessed by the city. It shouldn't be thrown away because the city is part of it. The sidewalk needs to be protected, and I think there needs to be possibly a gate on 2nd Street. I don't think that what you pass right away should be gospel without the engineering part of it. They're going to design what suits them, but it should also suit the city. Sarcastic, the mural is beautiful out here. They broke the sidewalk. The sidewalk up there, I think, broke because it wasn't strong enough. And I think the sidewalk out here wasn't strong enough. I had discussions with Mr. Mills about having the sidewalk tested up at 2nd Street. He didn't want to have that. But we need to find out what the sidewalks were there, and when they're going to come in and work on the water tank and stuff like that, there need to be access points, not just from the west side, but also from the east side. Thank you.
Thank you.
Back on citizen comment.
While you're standing there, might as well.
Lock people out when you put the citizen comment at the end. So many cases, there's 1 or 2 of us left in the room other than the city staff. Or you have a guest come in so many times lately, and they sit here for 3 hours to get their minute and a half. And you ought to let the citizen comment come back up front so that you all can hear what the people are thinking about. Thank you.
Thank you. Please.
I'm Jay LaGree. I live on Prospect Street. Now I found a penny in my notebook. The presentation by the person who is a stormwater planning person brought many questions to my mind. He talked about the beauty of the lakes, the recreational value of the lakes, but in fact, the lakes are wet ponds. We have 12 to 15 outlets into Lake Gerar. We have a number of outlets that go into to Silver Lake, and those are stormwater outlets. And when we have a heavy rain event, we change the level of those lakes considerably. DNREC just came out with a new Delaware stormwater BMP standards and specifications. It's 190 pages. And when you have a wet pond, we have two, you have to follow a specific set of rules and standards and management practices that are clearly defined in this book. And then in January, they made this part of Chapter 40, Title 7, Delaware Code. These guidelines became law. And something we should think about doing before we spend money. And by the way, dredging 7,000 or 6,000 cubic yards of muck from the southwest prong puts a tremendous impact on the rest of that lake. You talk about an impact on the environment. Dredging really does the trick. So we need to have a plan. And he said on this title slide, he said he had a stormwater management plan for Rehoboth. I've never seen that. Can you refer me to that plan so I can get a copy of it and read it and go through it? Because I'll promise you it disagrees with the plan that DNREC advocates and which they are going to make law. If we're going to, and I've said this before, so I'm just repeating, and please forgive me, but if we pull a certain number of yards of dredging out of that prong and put that on the shore, it's got to go somewhere, and it's a permitting process that's got to be passed by DNREC. You got to permit the dredging, you got to permit the application, you got to permit the trucks that carry it, and you got to permit the people that accept it. So that's coming. I don't know what you're going to do, but that's coming. The code, Title 7 says that they give the guidelines for creating a stormwater utility, and we should do that. We should create a stormwater utility because we're going to need money. We're going to need all kinds of stuff. And one of the first things you do is you have an ordinance, and then you have with the ordinance, you create a stormwater management entity, and the law calls for that, so we're going to have to do it. And we need a stormwater funding protocol. And the mayor and I have talked about it in years gone by, and it's just a challenge that we're going to have to look at. We're really going to have to look at it. And if we accept that, then we have to accept an entirely new standard of management of Lake Gerar and Silver Lake. And you can't just haphazardly pull muck out of one corner unless you got a management plan. This thing says you can't put trees up against the wet pond. And we got the whole north side of Lake Gerar is just, as the fellow said, they lean out 15, 20, and they drop their leaves in the water and muck. The buffer around Lake Gerar looks like crap, and it usually looks like crap. And I don't know what day he chose to make those photographs, but I've never seen it look like that, and I go by there all the time. You can find tennis shoes in there, you can find sticks and stones. The wet pond regulations say you cannot have trees near the edge of the, so they say that you have to mow your by the way, they say riparian borders are optional. But if you do have a riparian border, you gotta mow it because you gotta, once a year, the guidelines say, because you gotta mow out all the saplings and stuff. We need a plan, we need an ordinance, we need you to start thinking in that direction, and we need to mow that buffer and take care of the geese like we take care of them on Silver Lake. By the way, Anybody who wants to see what that East Lake Drive reclamation project, go take a look at it right now. The coconut logs broke loose and floated out into the Silver Lake is an active lake. It's got wind coming from the southwest in the summer and the northwest in the winter. It's really active. You get a big rain event and it runs over the coconut logs. Anyway, they were gone within a year and a half, and half of them ended up around my dock. My wife has pictures pulling this stuff out of there. Thank you for your consideration. Mow the buffer, make Lake Gerar look beautiful again.
Thank you. Please.
Good segue. Thank you, Jim.
Oh. So great to see you, Commissioner.
Anyway, my name's George Cole. I'm here for my mother, Kitty, and I think you all got a letter. We live on Lake Gerar, and I know Todd, and I listened to his presentation, great presentation. Known him for years. He's an expert. And sometimes, as I sat many times on some boards, sometimes the experts can go, get a little excessive in their job. And of course, I think he alluded to the stormwater problem. That's the problem with the water quality in Lake Gerar. You'll never solve that as long as you keep dumping things in there. So I don't know what the goal is on water quality. It sounds like there's always been fish in Lake Gerar. And I was a young man, there was always ducks and things like that. But this buffer has gotten way out of hand. I think the original management plan was for 10 feet. It's now 20 feet and plus, which means somebody's neglected it. Now, I'm not blaming anything on Todd. Maybe somebody said, let it grow. But I would say the 10 feet is just as effective as as getting deeper and deeper. What it also has done is brought another natural habitat for these unintended consequences, which is the critters that show up. Snakes. When I was a young man, as a kid, we would love to find a snake. I never found any snakes. Now there's snakes up in her house and in her garage, in her cellar. And just recently, 3 or 4 my brother took off with. So snakes, there's now raccoons and a fox and stuff, which is fine. But once, we start having rabies problems and other issues that are associated with this, we might want to be concerned about it. I don't see another reason why we have to have this vegetated buffer totally around the west side of Lake Gerar. Why open banks couldn't be appropriate, that couldn't be stabilized, and I'm sure they could. And I agree, the pictures, they were beautiful pictures. I'd love to live there, but very seldom does the around Lake Gerar look that good. The west end, on that west end prong, it looks terrible. And Todd alluded to, there's a bog in there that ought to be removed. Well, it should have been removed years ago. Trees hanging over. There's always been trees hanging over lakes. Everywhere I go, naturally trees hang over lakes. So again, I think you overreact sometimes to a lot of these issues about what's causing water quality problems. I think it's stormwater more than anything, and that's the problem everywhere throughout this state. So I'd like to see open banks. I'd like to see that buffer reduced. And in some places on the west side, I know on the east side, the concern is the geese would go to the bathroom on the sidewalk, and nobody wanted to on the walkway. We'll leave the buffer on the side that has the walkway. On the west side, there is no walkway. There's no reason that a duck or a goose cannot wander up there. Seeing ducks and geese in these ponds have always been around forever. To me is as pretty as seeing just some of the flowers and the bushes and the trees. So I don't see really the reason that the geese and the ducks, I know the resident geese are a problem, they're a problem everywhere, but just the natural flight paths of some of these animals shouldn't be of a great concern. So let me think if there's anything else I left out here, but I think, and it also appears that Silver Lake's gotten a lot of attention, more so than Lake Gerar. It seems like it's been neglected, so I'd like to see some more attention to Lake Gerar. I don't ever remember a mosquito problem. As a kid growing up around Lake Gerar, we never had a mosquito problem. Now, when mosquitoes were a problem, they were a problem throughout the whole community, not just around Lake Gerar. So the idea that we're solving some kind of mosquito problem, I don't think there was a problem. Vegetative blooms, I don't ever remember seeing vegetated blooms before all this happened. So possibly sometimes introducing some of this stuff has created other problems. So, and a lot of it, a lot of this stuff these solutions that Todd talks about, these best management practices make a lot of sense. They're temporary sometimes, and you look back in a couple of years, we've put the wrong vegetation into this. These vegetated shorelines don't work in most places. They sounds good, it feels good, but you end up spending a lot of money coming back and revisiting this. It's job security for Todd. God bless him. I like him. He's like I said, he's done a great job. So those are my comments on the lakes. I don't have much to say about Silver Lake, but the other issue is I listened to your pedestrian problem. Folks, you have no problem. Whatever you're doing here works. You had 10 million visitors in the last 3 years. You had 4 accidents. Don't spend a lot of money solving that problem, because I may be a future taxpayer here in a few years, so I'm getting concerned about the spending in City Hall. Right, Jay? Thank you very much.
Thank you, George. Anybody else?
My name's Marie Hetkevich. I live on Munson Street. I am a citizen, using Susan's term. My husband and I have owned a property in Rehoboth for 30 years, but only recently moved full-time here in May. I have a couple comments, and unfortunately, they're not going to be immediate to what has just unrolled. I do have a concern about the administrative variance. Having just built a house in Rehoboth and followed all the setbacks and all the rules and regulations and design changes out the wazoo, I am concerned about that foot that Lisa's talking about, Commissioner Schlosser is talking about. It becomes a big deal. And once it's grandfathered in, it becomes part of the site. It doesn't go away. So I know there's going to be a public meeting about it, but I want to register my concern. The second area I'm concerned about is the commissions and committee appointments. First of all, I do agree, I think you have a communications problem. I searched the website, and short of finding where you could fill out an application for a committee, there was no definition of the committees. Now, maybe I missed it. Is there?
It's there, it's hard to find, but it's there.
Yeah.
It's on the website.
I didn't find it.
Yeah,
I
that's
tried.
fine.
I think you do need more public awareness, because it's a fairly fluid community. You get new retirees, new people moving in all year round. Secondly, I do agree with Susan, and I do think that there has to be a concerted effort to make sure citizens are represented. I appreciate the fact that there are experts outside of our area, and Rehoboth is a big area. Everybody lives in Rehoboth, even if they're on the west side of Route 1. It's Rehoboth. But in reality, the people who have the most skin in the game are the citizens. And I don't mean to be impolite. Rehoboth is a very polite community. I came from a much rougher community, West Goshen Township. And we spoke our minds. But I have some very specific concerns about some of the appointees and the potential direction of the planning committee. And again, my apologies for being impolite, but I do have a concern that the city is looking at putting a member on the planning committee who has spent, 3 or 4 years suing the city over the pool issue. Will that be resurrected as part of the new planning commission? I'm concerned about developers joining the committee, because again, that's a voice that doesn't necessarily coincide with the residents, we the citizens. I understand there will be more opportunity for comment, but I want to register my concerns.
Okay, thank you. Yes, please.
Thank you for hearing me out.
Can you give me your name and address, please?
Edwin Thomas, and live on Hickman Street, and owned the property, my family's, for 40 years. So kind of had limited contact with the city. We just kind of went along with everything. But something recently just occurred on Hickman that I had to voice my objection to being done. a stop sign was put on Hickman at Laurel. I really doubt there was any kind of traffic study that would have justified a stop sign. Federal codes and state Title 21 both specify guidelines for setting up all traffic control setups in them. And both, when I called the city to voice my concerns about it, mainly because my son was talking to the gentleman when they were doing it, and the city employee's answer was, stop having parties. That's why you're getting this stop sign. Well, I didn't find that real appropriate. I worked 30-some years for a city that we'd be lucky if we had 3 pedestrian accidents a week. We had, several times we had them 3 times a day. So it was, I'm familiar with municipal workings and stuff, but I didn't think that response by him was proper. And my knowledge, I spent 37 years in law enforcement, so Title 21 I'm pretty familiar with. Both the Title 21 and the federal codes both specify, because when I called the city, they told me it was put up to slow down the speeders. Well, both codes specify under stop signs shall not be used for speed control. They give you all kinds of options for speed control, but a stop sign is one they actually specifically list in there that it should not be used solely for speed control. And I know the volume of traffic sometimes is heavy there, especially 4th of July and stuff, but there's not nearly enough traffic to justify a stop sign there. And I can think of one accident in the last 17 years at that intersection. I said I was down here like 12 weeks a year, every year for most of my working life. And then all weekends throughout the rest of the year. So I pay attention to what goes on around me. And what was really more troubling was when I called the city and they told me that it wasn't a city, didn't pay to put the sign in. It was put in at the request of the homeowners association. So that kind of tells me something's strange, because I've talked to several people that are in the homeowners association and knew nothing about it. I got a letter for the barbecue they were having at the end of the year, but I didn't get a letter that they were going to put a stop sign right in front of my house. They put with the yellow line that they painted, I lost almost all my parking ability in front of my house. I mean, I'd have to fringe on somebody else's. I know I don't own the parking. I leave to go do an errand. Somebody pulls in to park there, they're entitled to it. I have no claim to it, but the convenience is that everybody kind of treasures their parking in front of their house. Well, the yellow line was painted 30 feet across my 50-foot lot, so it didn't leave me a lot when you had the driveway to put a car. I could barely fit a little Toyota in there. And the yellow line is not even listed as being required by state or federal coding for a stop sign. It's a city ordinance, but you certainly don't apply the city ordinance evenly throughout the city, because I go around and I see 5-foot spacing before the first parking place. I see no yellow curb telling people they don't park next to a stop sign on certain streets. I just first time ever I've been unhappy with you guys. So when it's getting put up here. In fact, I started my law enforcement career down in '74, started the riot. I was one of the officers who started the riot we had down here Memorial Day. So I would wish that stop sign would be removed and other steps taken if they're wishing to take control of speed, because there's not a volume of traffic that's needed. And they talk about speed bumps, and the city official I talked to said that they don't like them because of the plowing issue and stuff. Well, I guess it doesn't snow on Columbia Avenue because they got speed bumps up there. So, Hickman Street doesn't qualify, I guess. I don't know, but I am not really thrilled with that put there, especially if it was my homeowners association that sends me notices when I owe them money, and when I can come to the picnic, but they don't tell me that my house is the one that's going to be affected by losing all my on-street parking ability. And I got 2 adult kids and a sister that I co-own the property with. And so I'm going to be taking up all my neighbor spaces when they do come down to stay with us. So I just wanted to make my voice heard. I've tried calling. I talked to, a couple people that I could talk to, but I figured if there was a way to, if you grant variances for certain parking areas, I walked around, I got pictures of them all. There's like, it seems like when you have a metered space, you may have from here to his feet is yellow, and then it starts the first space because that's a moneymaker for the city. Well, I just don't see where common sense tells me that I got to take up 30 feet of my property front when when I only got 20 more because of that stop sign. Guidelines for stop signs. I said my background was in law enforcement. Height and size of the sign for sight issues, and nothing at all about having a yellow curb out there. And you've got really inconsistent way of the way your streets are marked for that. And I think that would be if somebody brought issues with it, which I'm not saying I'm not, but that's really, it's.
Thank you.
Thank you
You've
very
made
much.
your point.
Thank you.
If you want to.
Mr. Thomas, thank you for speaking up.
I missed your call. I was
yeah.
driving on 95 and I couldn't.
I did give you a call back a couple of times, left a message, so sorry we didn't get a chance to speak. A couple things. I agree with you. Being in law enforcement myself for many years, stop signs should not be erected to slow traffic down. That's not the purpose of that. There's warrants that are associated with that regarding accidents, traffic accidents, pedestrian safety, everything else. The city code reads that the yellow line needs to be, and the first parking spot needs to be 30 feet from where a stop sign is located. That's the reason for the yellow stop bar. The chief of police did, I asked him to, and he did, based on my direction, measure all of the stop signs in Country Club Estates, and they were, in fact, erected with a 30-foot yellow bar. No, and granted, on the south side and maybe other places in town, it is not done like that. If you're able to share with us the other areas where you did take photos of signs, we'll be happy to look at that. And again, unless the code is changed to where a 30-foot stop bar, yellow line. Right.
I mean, it's a city ordinance, state code doesn't.
But it is a city ordinance.
Yeah, but I don't know what the purpose would be for, because you don't adhere to it when there's a parking metered space within that amount of distance.
Yeah, well, there are site issues associated with that, as you're aware, and I think your house is in a different situation than many houses along that way. But unless that ordinance is changed by the commissioners, then
People to change it. I
okay.
would vote for you, any of you to
Okay,
change.
and I will.
It's not really, I mean, based on my experience, and I said I'm not a traffic engineer, but I know a traffic engineer wouldn't justify that because it's not for that purpose. So that yellow curve would not need to be there then.
Right.
So if you want to keep the sign there, take away the yellow curve, and I'm all for trying to do whatever you can do to make things safe. Like I said, I was in the field. I know people get run over, and I said there's one accident that I can remember. There was a car running from Rehoboth Police, and he tried to make the turn, hit the house on the corner.
Okay.
And that's it. And all the 40 years. I've been there, so.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other citizen comments? No? If not, move into commissioner comments. I just have one. I wanted to acknowledge the decision made on September 23rd by the Board of Adjustment to uphold the building commissioner's decision related to the calculation of FAR in a matter related to the construction of a proposed new hotel on Baltimore Avenue. although I'm respectful of both the chief building inspector's interpretation and the subsequent outcome to uphold this by the Board of Adjustment, I do recognize the unintended consequences brought to light. I would ask the commissioners to consider directing the city solicitor to prepare a draft amendment to the zoning ordinance to reflect any discrepancies created.
Reflect or correct, Mayor? To correct any discrepancies, you mean, or clarify?
Reflect.
Okay.
Because, again, what happened in the Board of Adjustment meeting, as well as the decision by the building inspector, is based upon what's in the code. How that code was interpreted by this building inspector versus previous building inspectors has kind of gotten lost in the shuffle. And that's where everybody is coming back and saying, hey, this over here, it worked here, it worked here, it worked here. Well, this is something that I think we need to look at, because I don't know, personally, I've got my own opinion about considering porches or decks as part of, gross floor area. A balcony, is that part of gross floor area? If it's enclosed, sure. Porch, if it's enclosed, sure. But the way it's been interpreted, it's anything that sticks out the side of the building or any place on the first floor or the second floor. So I think this is something that we need the solicitor to look at in order to not necessarily correct the deficiency, but maybe take the deficiency away and put it to where we've seen it in the past.
So
How it was, the interpretation.
are we talking about a clarifying ordinance, to sort of the way the one building on a lot clarifying ordinance was done, so that we take the interpretation and just clarify what it means?
Well, I think he's already clarified what's in the code.
Who has?
The building inspector. Basically.
And the Board of Adjustment
And the Board of
twice.
Adjustment. They've had
Right.
said that. But my feeling is the Board of Adjustment just agreed with the building inspector because that's the way the code is written. It's the interpretation. And I think we need to look at the interpretation and how we look at the interpretation as the commissioner body, so that we can point out to the building inspector.
Well, and the other thing that was recommended after the meeting, I was talking to Linda Linda Kaufman, who was on the Board of Adjustments. She said what would really be useful would be to have a table, so that instead of looking through all the verbiage, you have a table, what counts and what doesn't count in black and white. And I thought that was a good suggestion.
I think that having something like that is helpful. But I support, Mayor, I've heard from several constituents across town about their concerns with this change.
I think all of us.
So I would like to, I'd like to not formally second, but I would like to endorse the idea of asking our solicitor to come forward to the next meeting with a ordinance that clarifies what the intent and what the interpretation should be or is. Am I saying that right?
I guess.
Mayor, too, whoever.
My question is, will the ordinance be consistent with the decisions of the Board of Adjustment? That is, the way that the chief building inspector is currently interpreting gross floor areas. Should this ordinance be consistent with that determination in the Board of Adjustment's decisions, which I understand from the last Board of Adjustment hearing is a divergence from the way previous building inspectors have done it on commercial properties. And we also learned during the last Board of Adjustment hearing that residential reviews are done in a way that is different than commercial reviews. I think perhaps for reasons that make sense, commercial reviews involve a lot of other entities that get involved. For example, fire marshal, for occupancy reasons and stuff, looks at these outside areas differently than in the residential context. So I just want to be sure that if I'm bringing a clarifying ordinance, am I clarifying that the Board of Adjustment and the chief building inspector have the proper interpretation for commercial properties, and the residential properties, as they're doing currently in the office, are to be done the way that Matt is currently doing residential reviews, or am I clarifying something else?
So are we looking at potentially having two different standards, one for commercial and one for residential, since it seems like that's the way it's been done?
That's been the application recently until this recent decision, correct?
That there's two separate.
Well, you know, that's the part that's confusing to me, because I heard from several constituents, but on both ends of it. I heard from somebody who, you know, has a building plan, came in the day after, and it's probably the one we all got, and says, you know, why suddenly has it changed? And I heard from somebody else who said that, no, they built to the standard that the building, the commercial standard, they had built a house, but it included the decks. And they're basically saying, you know, why would you give somebody something I didn't get? So there's opinions on all sides of that, based on how it's been interpreted, and it should be made consistent. I totally agree with that.
I think I'd like you to come forward with one consistent interpretation. You know, I think, and it doesn't necessarily have to be the one that was discussed at the Board of Adjustments. I think what is the right interpretation for the intent going forward. I wasn't at the board. I'm reacting and commenting based on the citizen notes and such that I got. It's been one way for many, many years. It's
But
been
not
interpreted.
consistently even that, based on what I
Yeah,
heard.
before Dom came, it was interpreted one way for both commercial and residential. And then, I mean, that's my
Everybody says that.
understanding.
Right.
So.
I mean, we'd almost have to go back and look at who approved what when, because it's not, it wasn't consistent, and I'm disturbed by that.
I'd like a recommendation as to how it could be consistently. Is that what you're asking for, Mayor?
Yeah, I just, you know, the way I look at it, and especially the presentation that was made by one of the people representing the hotel on Baltimore Avenue, and he had gone through specifics of 10 different properties over the last 10 years that have never used this as part of their decision-making process. Now, all of a sudden, it's part of the decision-making process. So, like, I'd like to get back to where, you know, what is the intention? Is a deck, I've got a deck on my house, and it's never been counted as gross floor area. I mean, it's just a deck. It's not, it's got a railing, and, you know, Dom has basically interpreted a railing as a wall. And so therefore, that deck is an enclosed space. If not enclosed with a roof, but enclosed. And, excuse me, please. Thank you, we're having a conversation.
He's right, he's right.
It needs to stop. Mr. Solicitor.
Yeah, you're right. You're right, Walt. Have a seat.
Should be on the next agenda.
Yeah.
We can ask for the next agenda item to include a proposed updated ordinance. That's, I think, what the mayor's asking for, that addresses the issue for the next agenda item, for the next meeting.
That's fine,
Consensus
yeah.
to move this ahead.
That's right.
He was just trying to explain, I think.
Yeah.
You know.
I think there's
So,
consensus.
That's fine.
And again, under commissioner comments, commissioners are allowed to make comments. Now, are there any other
Mayor, I just want to make sure that from commissioner comments, we're asking for an agenda item for the next meeting that includes a revised ordinance from, you know, as to how we can clarify this issue from the solicitor.
We're asking for a revised ordinance?
Or new ordinance.
Amended ordinance? Or
Amended,
just-
whatever the right direction according to the legal approach.
Well, the exact
That we could
agenda item,
consider.
how it's worded, can be done, you
Right.
know, a week prior.
Let me work with the city manager, and we'll
Yeah.
put together something for the next agenda.
That's it. Thank you.
Agenda item description for Ann for the
Yeah.
next meeting.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Any other commissioner comments?
Just very quickly, on totally different topic. The anticipated and exciting Greyhound event is coming to our city later this week. There'll be an opening event on Wednesday evening. Public is invited to be able to go in. It's a preview event at 6 p.m. And then things are going to go on Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and there'll be a parade, or maybe they're calling it a stroll, on the boardwalk at 10 a.m. Sunday morning. So there's going to be several hundreds of greyhounds and their owners and many, many vendors in our convention center. I think a very exciting event for everyone in the city.
So there'll be something in the convention center Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, or Sundays
I'm not sure of that. City manager may know that. I know they start with a preview event Wednesday evening. I'm not sure. Yes.
Oh, okay.
They have several events, I'm not certain what time, but they'll be through Sunday.
Right.
Any other commissioner comments?
No.
If not, the next meetings, we've got a meeting, our regular meeting is on the 18th, which is Friday. Just remember, we've got on the 28th of October, the joint meeting with the Planning Commission, and that's at 10 o'clock on Friday, the 28th?
Yes.
Is that right?
Yeah. Monday, the 28th.
Monday, the 28th, yeah, that's exactly. It's Monday, the 28th, I'm sorry. And then our next workshop is on October 4th, and if there's nothing.
November 4th.
November 4th, thank you. If there's nothing else, this meeting's adjourned.
And the joint meeting on the 28th starts at 10?
10.